You
They
have
say
mustard on
never
your
wake a
vest.
sleeping
What?
giant.
No
But
way.
what
Right
happens
there.
when a 6-year-old girl walks up to the most dangerous man in a roadside diner, a patched member of the Hells Angels, and whispers a secret that freezes the blood in his veins? It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea for money. It was a single sentence about a tattoo. A sentence rehearsed in whispers for 4 years inside a locked van. A sentence that would unlock a decade-old mystery, shatter a criminal empire, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the world is a mother's love disguised as a child's innocence. This isn't just a story. This is the day a woman who spent 10 years in chains finally pulled the trigger on the longest con of her life. This is the story of Juniper and the angel. The darkness inside the van had a weight to it, not the clean darkness of a bedroom at night or the soft black behind closed eyelids. This was a living thing, a wet, clinging darkness that smelled of rust and urine and old fear. It pressed against the skin like a second layer of clothing that could never be removed. Ren Calloway had lived inside this darkness for 3,652 days. She knew the number because she counted. Every single morning when the thin line of light crept through the hairline crack where the back doors didn't quite seal, she would press her fingernail into the foam of the mattress and add another mark. 10 years of marks, 10 years of mornings where the first thing she saw was the inside of a metal coffin, and the first thing she felt was the cold steel chain connecting her left wrist to a D-ring bolted into the floor. But this morning was different. This morning Ren was not counting days. She was counting minutes. She lay still on the dirty mattress, her breathing shallow, and controlled her eyes open in the black. Next to her, curled into a small ball with a one-eared stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest, was her daughter, Juniper. Junie, 6 years old, Tejo. Born in this van during a thunderstorm outside Gallup, New Mexico, while the man who called himself her father sat in the front seat eating a gas station burrito and listening to talk radio. Junie was asleep. Ren needed her to stay that way for exactly 12 more minutes. Because in 12 minutes, Garrett Finch would pull into the parking lot of the Rusty Kettle Diner on Route 66 in Kingman, Arizona. He always did on the second Tuesday of the month. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee and a patty, melt. He always took Junie inside with him because he liked the illusion of normalcy, like pretending to the waitresses that he was just a tired dad on a road trip. And he always, without fail, used the bathroom between his coffee and his food. That bathroom trip lasted between 4 and 6 minutes. Ren had timed it across 11 stops over the past year. She had memorized the route Garrett drove between Albuquerque and the California border. She knew every diner, every gas station, every truck stop. She knew his patterns the way a prisoner knows the rhythm of the guard's boots outside the cell door. And she knew one more thing, the most important thing. Route 66 through Kingman was a corridor, a highway that motorcycle clubs use like a river. The Hells Angels, the Banditos, the Mongols. They all passed through Kingman at one point or another, riding between charters in California and Arizona. It was a crossroads of chrome and leather. Ren had spent 4 years teaching her daughter a single sentence. She had whispered it during bath time in truck stop restrooms. She had drilled it during the long dark hours in the van while Garrett slept in motel rooms. She had made it into a game, a secret game that Daddy Garrett could never know about. The game was simple. If Junie ever saw a man with a specific tattoo, a stopwatch with the letters WC, where the number should be wrapped in a wreath of thorns and pierced by a dagger, she was to walk up to that man and say 7 words. "My mom has a tattoo just like yours." That was the signal. The flare gun fired into the dark, the message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of asphalt and exhaust fumes. It was an impossible plan. The odds of Junie encountering the one man on earth who carried that tattoo in the brief window when Garrett left them unattended were astronomical. Ren knew this. She had done the math in her head during the endless hours of darkness, calculating probabilities, with a mind that refused to stop working even when the body had been broken. But impossible was the only option she had left. The police had failed her. The system had failed her. The people in Fresno who were supposed to love her had sold her like livestock. So Ren Calloway did what women have done since the beginning of time, when every door is locked and every window is barred. She found a crack in the wall, and she poured everything she had into it. The van lurched to a stop. Gravel crunched under the tires. The engine died with a rattle that Ren could feel in her teeth. Kingman, she heard Garrett's door open, heard his boots hit the ground, heard him hawk and spit a habit that made her skin crawl. Then the side door slid open and the Arizona sun hit her like a physical blow. She kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing slow. Garrett Finch was not a large man. He was thin, wiry, with the jittery energy of someone who had spent too many years sampling his own product. His hair was greasy, his fingernails were black, and his eyes never stopped moving. He was 41 years old, but he looked 60. The desert and the methamphetamine had eaten him from the inside out, like termites in a wooden house. He reached into the van and shook Junie's shoulder. "Get up. We're eating." Junie stirred, clutching the rabbit tighter. She blinked in the sudden light, her small face scrunching against the brightness. She was small for her age, with blonde hair that tangled into knots no matter how carefully Wren combed it with her fingers. She wore a pink t-shirt 2 sizes too big and stained with ketchup from 3 days ago. "Can Mommy come?" Junie asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Mommy's sleeping. Don't wake her up. Come on." Garrett grabbed Junie's arm and pulled her out of the van. He didn't look at Wren. He rarely did anymore. She was furniture to him, a thing chained to the floor that occasionally needed to be fed and watered like a dog in a kennel. The side door slammed shut. Darkness returned. Wren opened her eyes. She did not pray. She had stopped praying in year 3. Instead, she did something harder. She hoped. She lay in the dark, in the heat, in the stench of her own captivity, and she hoped with a ferocity that was almost violent. Today. Let it be today. The Rusty Kettle Diner sat on the north side of Route 66 like a sunburned toad squatting on hot asphalt. It was a relic from the 1950s, all chrome trim and faded turquoise paint, with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered even in broad daylight. The parking lot was half gravel, half cracked concrete, and the air conditioning unit on the roof rattled like a dying animal fighting against the 107-degree Arizona afternoon. Inside, the lunch rush had come and gone, leaving behind the ghost of fried onions and the quiet hum of a mostly empty room. The checkered linoleum floor was scuffed and dulled by decades of boots and sneakers. A jukebox in the corner played something by Merle Haggard, but the speaker was blown, so it sounded like the song was being performed underwater. Dottie Ravenswood had been waitressing at the Rusty Kettle for 23 years. She was 61 with silver hair pinned up in a bun and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She had seen every kind of human being walk through that door. Truckers, tourists, drifters, runaways, honeymooners, and fugitives. She could read a customer the way a sailor reads the sky. And right now, the sky was telling her a storm was coming. It had walked in 10 minutes ago in the form of a mountain. Ronan Calloway sat in the back corner booth, the one closest to the emergency exit, which was the booth a man chose when he wanted to see every entrance and have a clear path to every way out. He was 45 years old, 6'4", and 240 pounds of sun-cured leather stretched over bone and muscle. His arms were sleeved in tattoos from wrist to shoulder, and his knuckles were inked with the letters HARDLUCK, faded blue against skin the color of old saddle leather. But it was the vest that told the story. The black leather cut was adorned with patches that Dottie recognized from 23 years of serving coffee to men who looked like they'd been assembled in a factory that manufactured nightmares. The top rocker read Hell's Angels. The bottom rocker read Bordeaux. And over his heart, the patch that made Dottie's hand tremble as she poured his coffee, the one that read Sergeant at Arms, the enforcer. The man the club sent when diplomacy failed and violence was the only language left. Everyone called him Sledge. He didn't look up when she poured. He hadn't spoken more than 4 words since he sat down. Black coffee. Thank you. His voice was a low rumble, like the idle of a big twin engine in a closed garage. His eyes, hidden behind aviator sunglasses, were fixed on something that wasn't in the diner. Something far away, something that lived in the past. Dottie had seen that look before. It was the look of a man carrying a ghost. On his left forearm, resting on the scarred Formica table, was a tattoo that had stood out from the rest. Not because it was larger or more colorful, but because it was different in character. Where the other ink was aggressive skulls and pistons and flames and iron crosses, this piece was precise, almost delicate. A dagger piercing a stopwatch, surrounded by a wreath of thorns. The face of the stopwatch didn't have numbers. It had letters. W.C. Wren Calloway, his baby sister. The girl who vanished from Fresno in 2008 like smoke through a screen door. Sledge had been 25 when he enlisted in the Army. Wren had been 15, still in high school, still living in the house on Maple Street with there of either a man whose only talents were drinking whiskey and finding new places on his children's bodies to leave bruises. Sledge had promised Wren he'd come back for her. He had promised he would get her out. He came back 3 years later with a Purple Heart, a titanium plate in his skull, and a discharge that was honorable on paper but ugly in the details. By then, Wren was 18 and had moved in with a girlfriend across town. She was working at a grocery store. She was surviving. She had his phone number, and she called every Sunday. Sledge fell in with the Hells Angels the way a river falls into the sea. It was gravity. It was inevitability. He was a man built for violence who needed a family, and the club was both. He rose fast. Prospect to patched member in 14 months. Patched member to sergeant-at-arms in 3 years. He was loyal, he was brutal, and he was smart enough to know when to be which. In 2008, the Sunday calls stopped. Wren's phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was empty. Her roommate said she'd started dating some guy, a drifter named Garrett, who drove a white van and always smelled like chemical smoke. The roommate said Wren seemed happy at first, then scared, then gone. The Fresno police filed a missing persons report and promptly lost it in the bureaucratic quicksand of an underfunded department drowning in case files. A detective named Hadley told Sledge that Wren had probably left voluntarily with her boyfriend, that she was an adult, that there was nothing they could do. Sledge did not accept this. He spent 5 years hunting. He rode every highway between California and Texas, showing Wren's photo at truck stops, diners, and shelters. He called in favors from every charter in every state. He spent money he didn't have, hiring a private investigator who turned out to be a fraud. He followed leads that went nowhere, tips that dissolved into dead ends, and whispers that faded into silence. By 2013, the trail was ice cold. By 2014, even the club stopped asking about it. By 2015, Sledge forced himself to believe she was dead. He got the tattoo, the stopwatch frozen on WC. Time stopped. Hope expired. But he never removed her photo from his wallet. And now, 3 years later, he was just passing through Kingman on his way back to the Purdue charter from a run in Flagstaff. A pit stop, a cup of coffee, a moment of silence in a diner that smelled like grease and loneliness. He had no idea that the most important person in his life was chained inside a van 60 feet from where he sat. The front door of the Rusty Kettle jingled open. Dottie looked up from behind the counter. A thin man walked in, twitchy, sweating, despite the air conditioning, with eyes that bounced around the room like a pinball. Behind him, holding his hand, was a little girl. Dottie's radar pinged immediately. Something was wrong. The man's energy was all wrong. He was too alert, too nervous, checking his phone every few seconds, like he was expecting a message that would either save his life or end it. The little girl was quiet in the way that children who have learned not to make noise are quiet. Not shy, not sleepy, trained. They sat 3 booths from the corner. The man ordered coffee and a patty melt. The girl asked for orange juice. The man snapped at her to just drink water. Dottie poured the water with a smile that hid the cold feeling in her gut. In the back corner, Sledge registered the new arrivals the way a predator registers movement at the edge of its territory. Not a threat, a nervous man and a kid. Domestic situation, probably. None of his business. He took a sip of his black coffee and returned to staring at the ghost that lived in the middle distance. 12 minutes passed. Garrett Finch stood up abruptly. The vinyl seat squeaked under him. He looked down at Junie with eyes that were hard and flat. "I gotta use the John. You stay here. Don't move. Don't look at anyone. Don't talk to anyone." His voice was a harsh whisper, jagged with anxiety. He was behind schedule. The phone in his pocket had buzzed 3 times in the last 10 minutes, and each buzz ratcheted his nerves tighter. He was supposed to be in Needles by 4. The people waiting in Needles did not tolerate lateness. The people waiting in Needles solved problems with shallow graves in the desert. Junie nodded, shrinking into the vinyl seat. She clutched the one-eared rabbit tighter against her chest. Garrett hurried toward the restroom at the back of the diner, glancing over his shoulder once before disappearing through the narrow hallway. The moment the bathroom door closed, something shifted. It was subtle. If you weren't watching, you would have missed it entirely. But Dottie was watching because Dottie always watched, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The little girl's posture changed. It was like watching a switch flip. One moment, Junie was a scared child slumped in a booth. The next, she was sitting up straight, her eyes scanning the room with a focus that was unsettling in someone so young. She wasn't looking randomly. She was looking for something specific. Her gaze moved from table to table, patron to patron, like a tiny searchlight sweeping the room. Her eyes landed on the massive figure in the back corner. She didn't see a criminal. She didn't see the patches or the tattoos or the scarred knuckles or the face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel. She saw his arm, the left forearm resting on the table beside the coffee cup. Junie slid off the booth. Dottie froze behind the counter. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell the child to sit back down, that the man in the corner was not the kind of man you approached. Not the kind of man you talked to unless he talked to you first. But the words died in her throat because the look on that little girl's face was not the look of a child being impulsive. It was the look of a child on a mission. Junie's sneakers made soft sounds on the checkered linoleum. She walked with purpose, straight as an arrow across the diner floor toward the mountain of leather and ink. Sledge heard the footsteps before he saw her. Light, small, the padded shuffle of cheap shoes on dirty tile. Not a threat, probably a kid wandering to the bathroom. He didn't look up. He took a sip of his coffee, which had gone lukewarm and tasted like motor oil mixed with regret. The footsteps stopped directly at his table. Sledge turned his head slowly. He lowered his aviator sunglasses, revealing eyes the color of glacial ice, pale blue, and sharp and utterly without warmth. The kind of eyes that had stared down the barrels of guns and hadn't blinked. The kind of eyes that made grown men cross the street. He looked at the child. She was tiny, fragile. Her blonde hair was matted into tangles that no comb had touched in days. Her pink shirt was filthy, stretched out at the collar, hanging off one bony shoulder. She was holding a stuffed rabbit that had seen better decades. It was gray with grime, missing its left ear, and its button eyes were scratched almost blind. But the child's eyes were not scratched. They were wide open and locked on his forearm with a laser focus that made something in Sledge's chest tighten. "You lost, kid." His voice came out rougher than he intended, the words scraping against the silence like a match striking concrete. Junie didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She didn't look at his face, in his vest, or his scars. She looked at the tattoo, the stopwatch, the letters, the thorns. She pointed a small, dirty finger at the ink on his wrist. "Hello, sir." Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the diner's silence like a bell. "My mom has a tattoo just like yours." The world stopped. Not metaphorically, not poetically. For Ronan Sledge Calloway, the planet ceased its rotation for 3 full seconds. The jukebox faded. The rattle of the air conditioner vanished. The smell of grease and coffee disappeared. There was only the child and her finger and the tattoo and those 7 words hanging in the air like smoke from a fired gun. He stared at the girl, his mind a machine built for tactical assessment and rapid threat evaluation, crashed like a computer hitting a fatal error. Because the tattoo on his arm was based on a custom design. He and Ren had drawn it together freehand on a napkin in a bar in Fresno in 2007. A pact between siblings. A matching mark that meant you are mine and I am yours, and nothing can break that. Ren had gotten hers inked first on her shoulder at a shop across town. Same design, same stopwatch, same letters, but with one addition. A blue flower woven into the thorns. A forget-me-not. She had chosen it herself. After she vanished, Sledge carried the napkin in his wallet for years. In 2015, when he finally forced himself to believe she was dead, he had the design inked onto his own forearm as a memorial. The artist who did it, a guy named Sketch, who worked exclusively for the club, had the stencil. But the original design belonged to 2 people and 2 people only. No one else on this earth had that tattoo. No one. Sledge grabbed the edge of the table with Ice's free hand. His knuckles went white. The Formica groaned under his grip. "What did you say?" The words came out barely above a whisper, stripped of all the gravel and menace, leaving behind something raw and exposed. "My mom," Junie repeated, still smiling that small, serious smile. "She has that picture on her shoulder. But hers has a flower on it, too. A blue flower." Sledge's heart, a muscle he was fairly certain had calcified into stone, sometime around his 3rd tour, slammed against his ribcage with the force that made his vision blur. He felt the blood drain from his face. He felt his hands begin to shake, and his hands never shook. Not when he held a gun, not when he held a knife, not when he held a dying man. Kid. His voice was dangerously quiet now, the kind of quiet that came before avalanches. What is your mom's name? Junie tilted her head the way children do when they're deciding whether to trust someone. She looked at the tattoo again. Then she looked at his eyes. Whatever she saw there passed her test. Mommy, but Daddy Garrett calls her Sarah sometimes. But she told me her real name is Wren. The sound that came from Sledge's throat was not a word. It was something more primitive than language. A sound that came from the place where grief and rage and hope had been locked in a cage together for 10 years, tearing each other apart in the dark. He bent forward in the booth, one hand over his mouth, his shoulders heaving once before he caught himself. He looked at the child again. The blonde hair, the shape of the nose. Narrow bridge, slightly upturned at the tip. It was the same nose that stared back at him from the faded photo in his wallet. Wren's nose. This was Wren's daughter, which meant Wren was alive. From the back of the diner, the sound of a toilet flushing echoed through the thin walls. Sledge's head snapped toward the hallway. The man, the nervous, twitchy, phone-checking man who had walked in with his child. The man Wren's daughter called Daddy Garrett. The bathroom door creaked open. Garrett Finch stepped out, wiping his hands on his jeans, a habit born not from hygiene but from the constant low-grade sweat that amphetamine dependency produces. He looked up. He saw Junie standing at the biker's table. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a time-lapse of a man dying. Then the blood came rushing back, hot and dark, flooding his skin with the crimson of pure terror disguised as rage. "Juniper!" Garrett screamed, rushing forward. The name cracked through the diner like a whip. "I told you not to move." He grabbed Junie by the upper arm, his fingers digging into flesh, barely padded by baby fat. Junie yelped a sharp sound of pain. The one-eared rabbit slipped from her grip and fell to the checkered floor with a soft thud. "I'm sorry, sir." Garrett was stammering now, looking at Sledge with the wide eyes of a man who recognized the patches and understood exactly what they meant. "She's got problems. Doesn't know when to shut up. We're leaving. He started to drag Junie toward the door. "Let go of the girl." Sledge didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He spoke with the absolute authority of a natural disaster, with the calm certainty of a man who had issued commands in combat zones and expected them to be obeyed not out of respect, but out of survival instinct. Garrett froze. His hand was still clamped on Junie's arm. His feet stopped moving as if the linoleum had turned to cement. "Excuse me. Let go of the girl," Sledge repeated, and this time he did stand up. He unfolded from the booth the way a grizzly stands up from a riverbed. He rose and he kept rising until his head was nearly touching the ceiling fan and his shadow fell across Garrett like a solar eclipse. He was a foot taller and 80 pounds heavier, and every single one of those pounds was arranged for the specific purpose of hurting people. "And sit down. We need to have a conversation." Garrett's eyes darted to the front door, calculating the distance. 12 feet, 15 steps, 3 seconds if he ran. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. She's my kid, and we're just passing through." "You're already in trouble." Sledge stepped out from behind the table, blocking the path to the exit with the casual ease of a man who had spent decades blocking paths. "The kid says her mom has a tattoo, a very specific tattoo, a tattoo that only one person in this world has. Where is her mother?" Garrett's demeanor shifted. The panic calcified into something harder, the cornered rat desperation of a man who had been running from something bigger than bikers for a very long time. "Her mom's dead. Overdosed 3 years ago in Albuquerque. Now get out of my way." "Liar." Sledge said it the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis, a statement of fact requiring no argument. "Because if she was dead, you wouldn't be sweating it like a pig in a smokehouse right now. And the kid says her name is Wren." He looked down at Junie, and when he did, something in his face changed. The granite softened. Not much. Just enough. Like sunlight hitting a rock face at the right angle and revealing that there was warmth hidden in the stone all along. "Is that right, sweetheart? Is your mommy named Wren?" Junie nodded. Tears were welling in her eyes from the pain where Garrett's fingers had dug into her arm. But she didn't cry. She was a child who had learned not to cry because crying made things worse. "Yes, Wren. She's in the van. She's sleeping." She paused. Then in a voice so small it barely existed, she added something that her mother hadn't taught her to say, something that came from her own heart. He hurts her. Sledge felt a red wave roll across his vision. Not anger. Anger was something he controlled. This was something older, something that lived in the basement of his brain where the civilized man couldn't reach. This was the thing that had kept him alive in combat and kept other people not alive. He locked eyes with Garrett. And Garrett, despite the methamphetamine and the desperation and the 12 feet to the door, saw his own death looking back at him. Garrett shoved Junie towards Sledge and bolted. He scrambled over a booth, knocking over a ketchup bottle that shattered on the floor in a spray of red that looked disturbingly like blood. He hit the ground, running shoulder-checking through the front door so hard the bell didn't jingle. It screamed, "Dottie, call 911, Sledge roared. But he didn't chase Garrett immediately. He caught Junie before she fell, scooping her up with one massive arm the way a man picks up a bag of feathers. She weighed nothing. She felt like she was made of bird bones and desperation. "You okay, kid?" Junie buried her face in his leather vest, the patches pressed against her cheek. She could smell tobacco and engine oil and something else, something she didn't have a word for yet, but would later learn to call safety. "He hurts Mommy," she whispered. "He hurts her bad." Sledge set Junie down in the booth with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands his size. He looked at Dottie, who was already dialing with shaking fingers. "Stay with her. Lock the door after me. Don't open it for anyone who isn't wearing a badge or a cut." Dottie nodded, pulling Junie against her hip. Sledge kicked the front door open. The hinges groaned. The Arizona sun hit him like opening an oven, 107 degrees of white heat and blinding light. He squinted against the glare and saw Garrett sprinting across the gravel parking lot toward a beat-up white Ford E-Series van parked in the far corner. The windows were painted black. The sight of those blacked-out windows sent a cold spike through Sledge's chest because he knew what painted windows meant. He had seen them on surveillance runs on raids on the kind of vehicles that carried things their owners didn't want the world to see. "Hey!" Sledge bellowed. Garrett reached the driver's side door, fumbling with a ring of keys, his hands shaking so badly that the metal jingled like Christmas bells in a hurricane. He dropped them, cursed, snatched them from the dust. Sledge was fast for a big man, unfairly fast. He covered the 60 feet of gravel in seconds, his boots chewing up the ground in long strides that ate distance like a machine. Garrett jammed the key into the door lock. Sledge's boots slammed into the door panel, pinning Garrett's hand against the handle with a crunch of small bones. Garrett screamed, a high, thin sound like a rabbit in a trap. Sledge grabbed him by the back of his greasy neck, lifted him off his feet, and threw him onto the hot asphalt the way a man throws a bag of trash into a dumpster. Garrett bounced. He tried to roll, reaching for his waistband with his unbroken hand. Sledge saw the glint of metal. A snub-nosed .38, chrome, cheap. The shot went wild. The bullet dug a divot in the dirt 2 feet from Sledge's boot, kicking up a spray of dust and gravel. The sound echoed off the diner walls and rolled across the flat desert like distant thunder. Sledge didn't flinch. He stepped forward with the calm of a man who had been shot at by professionals and found amateurs insulting. He delivered a single precise kick to Garrett's ribs. The impact was audible. Something cracked. Garrett curled into a ball, wheezing, the gun skittering away under a parked semi-truck 20 feet away. Sledge planted a heavy boot on Garrett's chest. He applied pressure slowly, methodically, the way a hydraulic press applies pressure. Garrett's eyes bulged. His mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "You move and I'll crush your sternum." Sledge spoke conversationally the way a man discusses the weather. "I've done it before. It's not pleasant for anyone involved." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a heavy-duty zip tie, the kind he carried for situations that defied conventional description. Within 30 seconds, Garrett was hogtied face down in the dirt, his broken hand bent at an angle that made Sledge's stomach turn slightly, but only slightly. Sledge turned to the van. The engine wasn't running. The windows were blacked out. The Arizona sun was beating down on the metal roof with the relentless enthusiasm of a star that did not care about the fragile things trapped beneath it. The interior temperature would be well above 130 degrees. If Wren was in there, she was cooking. He ran to the back doors, locked. He tried the side door, locked. He looked through the windshield, cupping his hands against the glass. Dark. A partition wall separated the cab from the cargo area. He could see nothing. Ren, he banged on the metal with both fists, the sound booming across the parking lot like a war drum. Ren, it's Declan, it's your brother. He used his real name, his first name, the name that only family called him, the name that had been buried under the road name Sledge for so long that it felt like putting on clothes that didn't fit anymore. No answer. Sledge didn't wait. He ran to his motorcycle, a custom Dynawide Glide parked near the diner entrance, its chrome catching the sun like a mirror. He opened the right saddlebag and pulled out a crowbar, a 2-foot length of forged steel, that he kept for situations involving locked doors that needed to become unlocked doors immediately. He returned to the back of the van. He jammed the flat end of the crowbar into the seam between the double doors, found the latch point, braced his feet, and heaved. The metal groaned, resisted. Sledge put his back into it, 240 pounds of muscle and adrenaline, and 10 years of grief compressed into a single vector of force. The latch gave with a screech that sounded like a dying animal. The doors swung open. The smell hit him first. Stale urine, old sweat, mildew, and underneath it all, the chemical tang of fear, the smell that human beings produce when they have been terrified for so long that terror has become a baseline body function. It was the smell of a kennel. It was the smell of a key. The interior was dark, the windows covered with sheets of rigid foam insulation duct taped to the walls. The floor was bare metal covered with a single stain mattress. In the corner, bolted to the floor, was a heavy-duty D-ring, the kind used to secure cargo in commercial vehicles. A chain ran from the D-ring to a pair of zip-tie cuffs around the left wrist of a woman who was curled on the mattress like a question mark. Sledge climbed in. The van rocked under his weight. His head brushed the ceiling. He moved toward the woman, his heart slamming in his throat so hard he could taste copper. She was emaciated. Her arms were sticks. Her cheekbones jutted against skin the color of old paper. Her hair, which he remembered as thick and brown and always smelling like the cheap strawberry shampoo she bought at the Dollar Tree, was matted into dark ropes. She was wearing a gray tank top and sweatpants that hung off her frame like curtains on a skeleton. She flinched when she heard him. She shielded her face with her free arm, the reflexive gesture of someone who has been struck so many times that the anticipation of impact has become a permanent posture. "Please, Garrett, I didn't make a sound." Her voice was brittle, thin, a voice that had been screamed raw and then whispered into nothing over the course of a decade. "I was quiet. I promise I was quiet." Sledge felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart. His heart had been broken for years. This was something deeper, something structural. A load-bearing wall in the architecture of who he was as a man collapsed, and everything it had been holding up came crashing down at once. He reached out and touched her shoulder. Gently. So gently that his hand barely made contact, the way you touch a butterfly's wing when you're trying to help it off the ground without destroying it. "It ain't Garrett, Wren. It's me. It's Sledge. It's your big brother." The woman lowered her arm, slowly, the way a person lowers a shield when they're not sure the battle is actually over. Her eyes, sunken and dark-circled and red-rimmed, struggled to adjust to the light pouring through the open doors behind him. She looked at the vest. She looked at the patches. She looked at the forearm and the tattoo, the stopwatch frozen on WC, the dagger, the thorns. Then she looked at his face. Deck. The word was barely a breath. A ghost of a name carried on a ghost of a voice. "Deck, is it really?" "I got you, Wren." Sledge pulled his knife and cut the zip ties binding her wrist to the chain. His hands were steady now, the way they always were when the mission was clear and the objective was in front of him. "I got you. You're safe now." She collapsed against him. She weighed nothing. She felt like holding a paper doll. Her sobs were silent at first, her body shaking without sound, because she had learned that sound was dangerous. That sound brought punishment. Then slowly the sound came. Small at first, then louder. Then a wail that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the floor of her soul, from a room that had been sealed shut for a decade and was now blown open. But even in the middle of that wail, even in the depths of that collapse, Wren Calloway did something that told Sledge everything he needed to know about who his sister had become during her 10 years in hell. She pulled back. She grabbed his vest with both hands, her bony fingers white against the black leather. She looked at him with eyes that were not defeated. They were burning. "The rabbit." Her voice was raw but urgent. Junie's rabbit. Mr. Bunn, is it still with her? Did Garrett take it? Sledge blinked. Of all the things he expected his rescued sister to say, this was not on the list. The stuffed animal, she dropped it in the diner. The waitress has it. Wren's entire body sagged with relief. Not the relief of a woman who had been rescued. The relief of a woman whose plan was still intact. Don't let anyone touch it. Don't let anyone throw it away. There's a USB drive sewn into the belly. I put it there 7 months ago. Sledge stared at her. You what? Garrett stole files from the people he works for. A digital ledger. Everything. Bank transfers, GPS coordinates, names, recordings. He hid the USB in the van because he thought I was too broken to move, too stupid to think. He was wrong about both. Her eyes were fierce now, the tears drying on her cheeks as something harder and sharper took their place. I found the drive 6 months into having it. I waited. I moved it into the rabbit's stuffing when he left us alone at a campground in Flagstaff. I created a new password. My password. He's been tearing the van apart for months looking for it. He can't kill me because he thinks I know where it is. And I do know where it is. It's in a one-eared rabbit in a diner in Kingman, Arizona. She smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Not the smile of a victim. The smile of a woman who had been playing chess in the dark for a decade and had just placed her final piece. I trained Junie to find you, Deck. I taught her your tattoo. I taught her what to say. I've been waiting for you to be in the right place at the right time. And today you were. Sledge looked at his sister. The emaciated, chained, brutalized woman who had just revealed that she had been running a covert intelligence operation from inside a locked van for the better part of a year. Who had turned her own daughter into a signal flare. Who had stolen a criminal empire's insurance policy and hidden it inside a child's toy. Wren, his voice cracked. Actually cracked, which hadn't happened since he was 14 years old. You crazy, brilliant, unbreakable woman. Get me out of this van, Deck, and then get me to a hospital, and then get me that rabbit, because what's on that drive is going to burn them all down. Sledge lifted her into his arms. She weighed less than his saddlebags. He stepped out of the van into the blinding Arizona sun, and as his boots hit the gravel, sirens began to wail in the distance. Dottie had made the call. Garrett Finch was still lying face down in the dirt, groaning. Sledge looked at him the way a man looks at a stain on the floor that needs to be cleaned up later. The first cruiser arrived at 1:47 p.m. Deputy Harlan Cade stepped out, hand on his holster, and tried to make sense of a scene that didn't conform to any page in his training manual. A Hell's Angel was sitting on the bumper of a van, cradling a skeletal woman who looked like she'd been pulled from a concentration camp. A hogtied man was bleeding in the dirt. A waitress was standing on the diner steps holding a little girl who was holding a one-eared rabbit. What the hell is going on here? Cade shouted, keeping his distance. His voice cracking slightly because he was 26 years old, and this was the worst thing he had ever seen. Officer, Sledge called out, not moving, not releasing his sister. This man kidnapped this woman and her child. 10 years ago, check the NCIC database. Wren Calloway, missing person, Fresno, California, 2008. Cade looked at the woman. She was shaking violently, her face buried in the biker's vest. He looked at the hog-tied man. He looked at the waitress who was nodding vigorously. He's telling the truth, Dottie yelled. That man had a gun. The biker saved them. Cade called for backup and paramedics. By 3 in the afternoon, Wren and Junie were in beds at Kingman Regional Medical Center. The doctors cataloged the damage with clinical detachment that masked their horror. Dehydration, severe malnutrition, multiple healed fractures in the ribs, the left cheekbone, and 3 fingers on her right hand, ligature scarring on both wrists, psychological trauma that would take years to even begin to assess. But Wren was lucid, she was coherent, and she was already planning. From her hospital bed, an IV dripping fluids into a vein that the nurses had struggled to find because her veins had collapsed from dehydration, Wren asked Sledge for 2 things. First, the rabbit. He brought it to her. She held it against her chest, feeling the hard rectangular shape of the USB drive through the stuffing, and she breathed. Second, she asked him to call his people. I need protection, Deck, not just you. Everyone. Because the man who ran that operation, the man Garrett worked for, his name is Dominic Ashcroft. And when Garrett doesn't show up for his delivery in Needles tonight, Ashcroft is going to send people to find out why. And when he finds out I'm alive and I have his files, he won't send people. He'll send ghosts. Sledge pulled out his burner phone. He dialed the number that only 5 people on Earth possessed. Yeah, a gravelly voice answered. Grit, it's Sledge. I found her. I found Wren. Warren Pemberton, president of the Hells Angels Purdue Charter, known to every biker between San Bernardino and the Mexican border, as Grit was silent for 4 full seconds. The entire club knew the story of Sledge's sister. It was the wound that never closed, the ghost that haunted the sergeant-at-arms. She alive. Barely. Kidnapped. Chained in a van for 10 years. The guy who had her, I didn't kill him, but it took everything I had. Cops have him. Good. Stay there. What do you need? Eyes, security. The guy was running product for a cartel. If his people come looking for the van and find witnesses instead of cargo, this gets ugly fast. Sit tight, Sledge. Ratchet and Boulder are on the Bullhead City run an hour out. I'm rolling out with the boys. We'll be there by nightfall. Thanks, brother. Sledge. Yeah. You found her. 10 years and you found her. She found me, Grit. She sent her daughter to find me. My sister played the longest game I've ever seen. Sledge hung up. He walked back to room 304 where 2 deputies guarded the door. He sat in the plastic chair outside and crossed his massive arms and waited. Inside, Wren was sleeping with one hand on the rabbit and the other holding Junie's small fingers across the gap between their beds. The sun began to set over Kingman, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. Sledge watched the elevator. Every time the doors opened, his hand twitched toward the knife in his boot. At 6 in the evening, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open. A man stepped out. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's cars. He carried a leather briefcase that gleamed under the fluorescent hospital lights. He walked with the smooth, confident stride of a predator who operated in courtrooms instead of alleyways. His hair was silver at the temples, his shoes were Italian, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes because the eyes were dead. He walked straight to the deputies. Gentlemen, his voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. My name is Prescott Lyle. I represent Mr. Garrett Finch. My client has informed me that his common-law wife and daughter are being held in this hospital against their will. I have here a temporary custody order for the minor child Juniper Finch, signed by Judge Haddon in Phoenix. He held up a document. Crisp paper, official seal. Deputy Cade looked at it. His face went pale. This is signed by a federal judge. How did you get this so fast? The arrest was 4 hours ago. Justice moves swiftly when a father's rights are at stake. Lyle smiled. I'm here to take custody of the child on behalf of her father. Sledge stood up slowly from the plastic chair. He moved between the lawyer and the door. He did not speak. He simply existed in the space between Prescott Lyle and room 304 like a wall made of scar tissue and bad intentions. Lyle looked at him with practiced disdain. Mr. Calloway, I presume, the convicted felon. If you obstruct a court order, you will go back to prison. Officer, remove this man. Cade looked at the paper. Then at Sledge. It looks legal, Sledge. I might have to enforce it. You're going to hand a child back to the people who kept her mother in chains. Sledge's voice was a controlled earthquake. Over my dead body. The elevator chimed again, and this time it didn't stop chiming. The doors opened, and out stepped Grit. Behind him, Ratchet, Boulder, Spur, 6 more patched members of the Hells Angels Purdue Charter. They filled the hallway like leather-clad floodwater, a wall of beards and boots, and barely contained violence. Problem, officer, Grit's voice boomed off the hospital walls. He was 62, barrel-chested with a white handlebar mustache and hands the size of dinner plates. Lyle's confidence flickered for the first time. This is a hospital. You can't all be here. Visiting hours. Grit cracked his knuckles. He looked at the custody order in Lyle's hand. He took it, read it slowly, then he tore it in half, in quarters. He let the pieces fall to the floor like confetti. Oops, Grit said. Clumsy hands. You just destroyed a court order. I'll have you arrested. For what? Littering. Grit leaned in close enough for Lyle We'll sigh for Lyle to smell the tobacco and motor oil. Walk away, counselor, because if you try to take that little girl, you're going to find out why they call us Hell's Angels. Lyle looked at the bikers. He looked at the overwhelmed deputies who were wisely keeping their hands at their sides. He looked at Sledge, who looked like a man measuring a coffin. This isn't over. Lyle hissed through clenched teeth. No, Sledge agreed quietly. It isn't. Lyle turned and walked briskly to the elevator. The doors closed. The hallway was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of heart monitors. But inside room 304, Wren Calloway was not sleeping. She was awake. She had heard every word through the thin hospital door. And when Prescott Paislewell's voice had drifted through the crack, smooth and oiled, and precisely enunciated, her blood had frozen solid. Because she recognized that voice. She didn't know the name Prescott Lyle. She had never seen his face. But she knew that voice the way a burn victim knows the smell of gasoline. It was the voice that had spoken on a phone in a Fresno apartment 10 years ago negotiating a price. The voice that had said, $20,000 for the girl, cash, the brother's military, so she needs to disappear clean, no local trail. It was the voice of the man who had brokered her sale. The man who had turned a 25-year-old woman from Fresno into a line item on a criminal ledger. Not a drug dealer, not a cartel soldier, a lawyer. A man who wore Italian shoes and carried a briefcase and operated in broad daylight. Wren pressed the call button. Sledge appeared in the doorway immediately. I know that voice, Deck. She was trembling, but her eyes were steel. The lawyer, I don't know his face, but his voice. He's the one who sold me 10 years ago in Fresno. He was on the phone with someone negotiating the price. $20,000. That's what I was worth. She gripped the rail of her hospital bed until her knuckles were white. He's not just a lawyer for the cartel. He's in the operation. He's a broker. And if he's here already with a judge's signature, that means the judge is in it too. This goes deeper than Garrett Deck. This goes into the system. The courtroom, the bench. Sledge's jaw tightened until the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. Then we can't trust the courts. We can't trust anyone except the people standing in this hallway right now. Outside in the parking lot, Prescott Lyle sat in his black Mercedes with the engine running and the air conditioning blasting. He was sweating through his $5,000 suit. He held his phone to his ear. Report. The voice on the other end was not loud. It was a rasp like sandpaper on dry bone. We have a situation, Mr. Ashcroft. The brother is Hell's Angels. He has an entire charter with him. They destroyed the court order. A biker. Dominic Ashcroft laughed. A sound without warmth or humor, like stones clicking together. You're letting mechanics in costumes stop a multi-million-dollar operation. That woman is the only loose end connecting Garrett to the organization. And the child is leverage. They are armed, sir. They have the floor locked down. Then stop being a lawyer, Prescott. Call Sheriff DeCault. Remind him who paid for his re-election. I want that woman silenced. And I want the girl. If you can't do it by morning, I'll send the ghost. And if I send the ghost, everyone in that hospital dies, including you. The line went dead. Upstairs in room 304, Wren Calloway lay in her hospital bed with her hand on a one-eared rabbit that contained the keys to a kingdom built on human suffering. Her daughter slept beside her, breathing softly, dreaming whatever dreams a 6-year-old dreams when she doesn't know yet that she has just set the world on fire. Wren stared at the ceiling. She was not afraid. She had used up all her fear years ago, spent it like currency in the dark, trading it for something harder and more useful. She was planning the clock on the hospital wall read 10:47 p. when Wren Calloway decided she was done waiting for other people to save her. She had been saved once already today. Her brother had torn open a van and cut her chains and carried her into the sunlight like something resurrected from a tomb. And she was grateful. She would be grateful for the rest of her life. But gratitude was a luxury, and Wren had learned a long time ago that luxury was something other people could afford. Right now, she needed to work. The IV drip hummed beside her bed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the relentless drone of institutional indifference. In the next bed, Uni was asleep, curled on her side with Mr. Bunn tucked under her chin, her small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of a child who didn't yet understand what was coming. In the hallway outside room 304, she could hear the low murmur of bikers and the occasional creak of leather as someone shifted position in a chair. Sledge had not left the hallway since 6 o'clock. He would not leave until she told him to, and she would not tell him to because she needed him exactly where he was. But she needed something else more. Deck! Her voice was still raw, still thin, the voice of a woman whose vocal cords had spent a decade whispering in the dark. But there was steel under the rust, and when Sledge appeared in the doorway filling it completely, she saw him register the change. She was sitting up. She had pulled the IV stand closer so she could move without disconnecting the line. Her eyes were not the eyes of a rescued victim anymore. They were the eyes of a woman at a command post. "I need the rabbit." Sledge hesitated. Not because he didn't understand, but because part of him, the part that was still a brother and not a soldier, wanted to tell her to rest, to sleep, to let him handle it. But he had heard what she said in the van. He had seen the architecture of a plan that had taken years to build, and he knew that the woman in this bed was not someone who needed to be handled. She was someone who needed to be obeyed. He brought the rabbit. Wren took it from him with both hands. She held it for a moment, feeling the familiar weight, the lopsided heaviness in the torso that she had engineered 7 months ago in a campground restroom in Flagstaff, while Garrett was passed out in the front seat. She ran her thumb over the place where the left ear used to be. Junie had asked her once what happened to Mr. Bunn's ear. Wren had told her that Mr. Bunn lost it in a fight with its dragon, and that losing something didn't make you broken. It made you a survivor. She pulled her brother's knife from the bedside table where he had left it. With hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, she slid the blade along the stitching on the rabbit's belly. The thread popped in a line. White polyester stuffing bulged through the opening like cotton clouds escaping a torn sky. Wren reached 2 fingers in and pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in black electrical tape, a waterproof military-grade flash drive, the kind you could buy at an Army surplus store for $12, the kind that could survive water heat impact in a decade of rage. "There it is," Wren said quietly. She held it up in the fluorescent light, turning it between her fingers. It was smaller than a cigarette lighter. It weighed less than an ounce, and it contained enough evidence to dismantle a criminal empire that stretched from the California border to the eastern seaboard. Sledge stared at the drive. "How did you even know what was on it?" "Because I watched. For 10 years, deck watching was the only thing I could do. Garrett talked on the phone in front of me like I was furniture. He left his laptop open in the van because he thought I couldn't reach it. But the chain had 3 feet of slack, and his laptop was 2 feet 11 inches from the mattress. I know because I measured it with my arm night after night, millimeter by millimeter, until I was sure." She set the drive on the bed beside her. "I copied nothing. I just read. For months I read his files every time he left me alone. Bank transfers, GPS coordinates of stash houses, video recordings of meetings, and a list." Her voice hardened, the steel showing through the rust like a blade emerging from a sheath. "A list of names, Deck. Women and children. Hundreds of them. Bought and sold like cattle. Routed through shell companies and transported in vehicles just like the one I lived in." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that frightened him more than any cartel gunman ever could. He saw purpose. "I'm on that list. My name is on a spreadsheet in a folder called Inventory. I have a purchase price and a transaction date and a buyer code. $20,000. October 14th, 2008. Buyer code LY7. "Lyle," Sledge said. His voice was granite. "Lyle," Wren confirmed. "When I found the drive in Garrett's hiding spot behind the dash panel, I didn't just take it. I changed the password. His password was the name of his toy from when he was a kid, Biscuit, all lowercase. I changed it to something only I would know. Then I hid it in the only place Garrett would never look, because he never looked at Junie. He never looked at anything that wasn't a mirror or a meth pipe." She placed her hand on the opened rabbit. "I need a laptop." Sledge went to the door. Within 2 minutes, Ratchet appeared with a battered Lenovo ThinkPad that one of the prospects used for bike diagnostics. It was held together with duct tape and optimism, but it booted up and it had a USB port, which was all Wren needed. She plugged in the drive. A password prompt appeared on the screen. Wren typed 6 characters, JUNI04, her daughter's name, and the day she was born, June 4th. The most important date in Wren's calendar of captivity, the day the darkness gave her a reason to survive it. The folder opened. Sledge leaned over her shoulder. The screen filled with a directory tree that looked like the nervous system of a monster. Folders within folders within folders. Financial records stretching back 15 years. Video files with timestamps and location tags. Audio recordings of phone conversations. Contracts written in legal language that barely disguised their true nature. Shipping manifests that listed human beings as agricultural equipment. And the list. It was a spreadsheet with over 400 rows. Each row was a person. Each person had a purchase price, a transaction date, a buyer code, a seller code, a transport route, and a status column. The status options were active, transferred, terminated, and escaped. Wren's row read active. Her purchase price was $20,000. Her buyer code was LY7. Her seller code was DF3, Garrett Finch. But it was the column headers that made Sledge's blood run cold. Because the spreadsheet wasn't maintained by a street-level drug dealer or a cartel lieutenant. The formatting was professional, the data was clean, the formulas were complex. This was corporate-level record-keeping. This was an organization that had accountants and attorneys and quality control. This isn't just a cartel, Sledge said, his voice barely above a whisper. Wren said nothing for a moment. She was scrolling through the list, stopping on certain rows, reading the names. Some had first names only. Some had numbers instead of names. Some were listed simply as female, age unknown. She stopped on one row, a girl, 14 years old at the time of purchase. Buyer code LY7, the same code as Wren's. Purchased 3 months after Wren. Status terminated. Wren touched the screen with her fingertip, resting it on the word terminated, the way a person touches a headstone. She was bought by the same person who bought me, Wren said quietly. 3 months later, 14 years old, and she didn't survive. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, the grief was still there, but it had been compressed into something denser, something that could be used as fuel instead of weight. No. Wren scrolled to a folder labeled Oversight. She opened it. Inside were scanned documents, court filings, and email chains between Prescott Lyle and a name that appeared over and over again in the correspondence. Judge Marcus Haddon, Federal Bench, District of Arizona. Haddon signed the custody order tonight, Wren said. Within 4 hours of Garrett's arrest. No hearing, no investigation. Just a signature and a courier. You know why? Because Haddon isn't just a corrupt judge taking bribes. He's a partner. He provides legal cover for the entire operation. When a victim escapes or gets found, Haddon signs orders that put them back in custody of the traffickers. He's done it 11 times. I counted. She pulled up an email chain. The language was coded but not impenetrable. Lyle would write to Haddon about asset recovery. Haddon would respond with case numbers and filing deadlines. Lyle would confirm compliance. The word inventory appeared 6 times in a single email thread. If we send this to the FBI, Sledge said, Haddon will know within hours. He'll bury it. He'll have the case reassigned to a friendly prosecutor. He'll issue sealing orders. That's exactly what he'll do. Wren closed the laptop. She looked at Sledge with the expression of a woman who had played out every possible move on the board and arrived at the only one that worked. Which is why we're not sending it to the FBI. Before Sledge could respond, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. The overhead fluorescence died instantly, plunging the room into total darkness. The IV pump beeped once, switched to battery backup, and continued its quiet hum. The hallway outside went black. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a deep arterial red that made the hospital look like the inside of a wound. Sledge moved to the door in 2 steps. In the red-washed hallway, he saw Grit already on his feet, a Colt 1911 in his right hand, the hammer cocked. The other bikers were shadows in the crimson light, moving to positions with the practiced efficiency of men who had been in bad situations before and expected to be in them again. They cut the power, Grit growled. Backup generators should have kicked on for the whole floor. Someone disabled the transfer switch. Inside job, Sledge said. Someone on staff. Or someone with a badge. The stairwell door at the far end of the hallway burst open. The sound was enormous in the silent hospital metal, slamming against concrete, And what came through was not a cartel hit squad. It was worse. It was the law. Sheriff Vulcan DeCault walked through the door flanked by 4 deputies. They were in full tactical gear vests and helmets and shotguns, and they moved with the rigid formation of men who had been given orders and were too scared to question them. DeCault himself was a big man, not biker big, but the bloated bigness of a man who ate too well and exercised his authority more than his body. His face was red and sweating. His eyes were small and mean. "Drop the weapons," DeCault screamed, his voice cracking off the walls. "Everyone on the ground! You are all under arrest for kidnapping and obstruction of justice." Sledge stepped into the hallway, hands raised but empty. He positioned himself between the sheriff and room 304 with the calm deliberateness of a man placing himself between a bullet and the thing he loved most. "Sheriff, you are making a mistake. The people in that room are victims. They were kidnapped." "I have a warrant for Sarah Finch." DeCault used the wrong name. The fake name, the name Garrett had given Wren, the name that existed only in the trafficker's records. "She is an accomplice to Garrett Finch in the transportation of controlled substances. Hand her over, and I won't have my men put you in the ground." Sledge studied the sheriff the way he had been trained to study enemies. He noted the expensive watch on a civil servant's wrist, a Breitling that cost 6 months of a county sheriff's salary. He noted the manicured fingernails. He noted the way DeCault's eyes wouldn't stay fixed, the way they kept sliding toward the stairwell door, like he was expecting someone else to come through it, or like he was making sure his escape route was clear. "You're on the payroll," Sledge said. "Not a question, a diagnosis. I am the law in this county." DeCault jammed his shotgun forward until the barrel was 3 feet from Sledge's chest. "You have 5 seconds to step aside, or I will." Behind Sledge in the red-lit doorway of room 304, a shadow moved. Wren had pulled herself out of bed. She was standing in the door frame holding the IV pole for support, her hospital gown hanging off her skeletal frame like a shroud. The red emergency lighting painted her face in shades of blood and bone. She looked like something risen from a grave. She looked like evidence. "Look at me, Sheriff," Wren said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent hallway it carried like a gunshot. "Look at what your paymaster did to me. 10 years in a box. Tell me again that I'm the criminal." DeCault glanced at her and looked away quickly, the way a man looks away from a car accident. The image disturbed something in him. Not his conscience that had been purchased long ago, but his calculation. A woman who looked like a skeleton in a hospital gown was not good optics for a man who might need to explain his actions later. But he had made his choice. The money was spent. The debts were owed. There was no going back. "Shut up and get back in that room," DeCault snarled. "No." The voice came from behind the sheriff. It was young and it was shaking, and it carried the weight of a decision that would define a career or destroy one. Deputy Harlan Cade stepped out from behind the tactical formation. He was still in his standard uniform, no tactical gear, no helmet, just his service weapon drawn and held in both hands. But his weapon was not pointed at the bikers. It was pointed at the back of Sheriff DeCault's head. "Put it down, Sheriff." Cade's voice trembled, but his hands did not. The hallway froze. 4 deputies looked over their shoulders. The bikers stopped moving. Even the emergency lights seemed to hold their breath. "I checked the warrant database," Cade continued, each word measured like he was reading them off a script he'd written in his own blood. "There is no warrant for anyone named Finch or Calloway. There is no case file. There is no probable cause affidavit. You are executing an order that does not exist in any system I have access to." "Cade, you stupid worthless. And I saw who you were texting in the cruiser, Sheriff. I saw the name Prescott Lyle. I saw the message that said, 'Clear the floor package ready for pickup.' That's not law enforcement language. That's trafficking language." DeCault's face went from red to purple. The tendons in his neck stood out like bridge cables. He didn't turn around. He didn't lower the shotgun. But something in his posture shifted the almost imperceptible sag of a man who realizes that the ground beneath him is no longer solid. "You're throwing away your career, kid. For biker trash, for a junkie and her brat." "I'm doing my job," Cade said, then louder to Sledge. "Get them out of here. I'll hold him." Sledge didn't hesitate. He had spent enough years in enough bad situations to know that hesitation was the luxury of people who had never been shot at. When someone gave you a window, you went through it. Angels move. The hallway erupted into organized chaos. Grit and Boulder grabbed the gurney with Wren, who was already disconnecting her own IV, with practiced efficiency pulling the needle from her vein with barely a wince. Sledge scooped Junie from the bed, the child waking with a cry that he muffled against his shoulder. Ratchet grabbed the laptop and the rabbit stuffing both into a backpack. The prospect at the far end of the hall had already propped open the fire exit. Behind them, the standoff held. Cade and Decault faced to barrel to face while four confused deputies tried to calculate which side of history they wanted to be on. No shots were fired. Not yet. Cade was buying time with a bluff and a backbone, and every second of that bluff was a second the bikers used to move. They burst through the fire exit into the cool October night. The ambulance bay was on the ground floor, a concrete pad lit by a single sodium lamp that cast everything in sick yellow light. The support van was already there, engine running its headlights, cutting through the darkness. It was a modified Ford Econoline, the kind the club used for moving cash and supplies on long runs. The panels were reinforced with steel plating, a modification that had been made for an entirely different purpose, but was about to prove its worth in ways no one had anticipated. "Load up," Sledge commanded. They moved Wren into the back. Junie went next, still crying, still clutching the now empty rabbit. The bikers piled in around them. Grit was the last in pulling the door shut behind him. A black SUV screeched around the corner of the hospital building. Its headlights blazed like the eyes of something hunting. Before anyone could shout a warning, automatic gunfire erupted from the passenger window. The rounds punched into the back of the van with a sound like a steel drum being played by a maniac, sparks flying off the reinforced panels. The rear window exploded inward, showering the interior with safety glass. "Drive!" Sledge roared. The van launched forward, tires screaming on the concrete fishtailing as it hit the parking lot exit ramp and merged onto the street. Behind it, 10 motorcycles roared to life in staggered pairs, engines screaming like a chorus of mechanical dragons falling into formation around the van with the practiced discipline of a military convoy. They were out of the hospital, but the highway stretched ahead of them like a vein, and the things following them through the dark were not the kind of things that gave up when their prey ran. Route 93 South, 10:58 p.m. The convoy was moving at 90 miles an hour. The van rode in the center of a diamond formation, the bikes flanking it two by two, their headlights cutting tunnels of white through the desert darkness. The road was a black ribbon unspooling through a landscape of nothing. No houses, no gas stations, no witnesses. Just sand and scrub and the occasional silhouette of a Joshua tree standing like a scarecrow against the star-filled sky. Inside the van, Sledge braced himself against the wall panels. The wind howled through the shattered rear window. Wren was on the floor, her back against the wheel well, her arms wrapped around Junie. The child had stopped crying. She was beyond crying. She had entered the silent, rigid state of a small animal that knows a predator is near, and that stillness is the only defense left. "Where are we going?" Wren asked. Her voice cut through the engine noise with a clarity that surprised him. "The Boneyard, scrap metal shop in a valley about 40 miles south. Club property. We can hole up there, get fresh vehicles, regroup." Wren nodded. Then she said the thing that changed everything. "We're not regrouping, Deck. We're ending this." Before he could respond, the radio on his hip crackled. "Sledge, we got company." It was Ratchet riding drag at the back of the formation. 3 SUVs, no lights coming up fast on R6. Half a mile and closing. Sledge grabbed the radio. "Grit, you copy." "Copy." Grit's voice crackled over the wind noise. "Boys, we got hostiles. Remember the hammer drill from the Tucson run in '09, same play. Ratchet, Boulder, drop back. Spur, hold the flank. Nobody touches the van." On the highway behind them, 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans were gaining fast running, dark, their headlights off, visible only as shapes blotting out the stars. They were spaced 50 yards apart, staggered, the formation of drivers who had done this before. Ratchet dropped his speed, letting the convoy pull ahead. He reached into the saddlebag mounted on his fuel tank and pulled out a leather pouch. Inside were 6 ceramic spark plug fragments, each about the size of a peanut. In the motorcycle world, they were called ninja rocks. Ceramic was harder than tempered glass. A fragment the size of a dime thrown at speed would shatter a car windshield like a bomb. The lead SUV was 30 yards behind him and closing fast. Ratchet could see the shape of the driver, could almost smell the adrenaline leaking from the vehicle. He waited. 20 yards. 15. He could see the bull bar on the front now, could see it was reinforced for ramming. 10 yards. Ratchet tossed the ceramic fragments over his shoulder in a wide arc. 6 tiny pieces of white mineral hit the SUV's windshield at a combined speed of over 150 miles per hour. The laminated safety glass didn't crack. It detonated. The entire windshield collapsed into an opaque spider web of fracture lines, blinding the driver instantly. The SUV swerved. Its tires caught the soft gravel shoulder. At 90 miles an hour, there was no recovery. The vehicle slid sideways, caught the guardrail with its rear quarter panel, and cartwheeled into the desert darkness in a tornado of dust and breaking metal and shattering glass. "One down," Ratchet whooped into his radio, but the second SUV had learned from the first. It hung back using the third vehicle as a shield, and the third vehicle had opened its passenger window. A man leaned out, bracing an MP5 submachine gun against the doorframe. The muzzle flash was a strobe of orange in the dark. Bullets sparked off the asphalt like fireflies. They pinged against the van's reinforced panels. One round punched through the sheet metal above the wheel well, 2 inches from Ren's head. She didn't scream. She pulled Uni lower, covering the child's body with her own, pressing her daughter into the floor of the van with the desperate geometry of a mother calculating which parts of her own body she could sacrifice to shield the parts of her child that mattered most. "They're shooting at us!" Junie shrieked, her voice muffled by Ren's chest. "It's okay, baby." Ren's voice was steady, impossibly steady. The voice of a woman who had been afraid for so long that fear had become background noise, something she could function through the way a factory worker functions through the sound of machinery. "Keep your head down. I've got you." Sledge grabbed the emergency kit bolted to the van's interior wall. He pulled out a flare gun, a single-shot launcher designed to fire a red phosphorus signal flare visible at 10 miles. It was not technically a weapon. It was about to become one. "Open the back doors," Sledge yelled to the young prospect driving the van. "Are you out of your mind? Do it." The prospect reached back and pulled the emergency release. The rear doors swung open on their hinges, caught the wind, and slammed against the sides of the van. The highway rushed past below a blur of black asphalt and white lane markers. The second SUV was right there 20 feet behind them, the gunman reloading a fresh magazine. Sledge braced his boot against the doorframe. He raised the flare gun, aimed at the SUV's front grille, and pulled the trigger. The flare left the barrel with a hollow pop that was swallowed by the wind. It arced across the 20-foot gap like a tiny comet, trailing red smoke, and buried itself in the SUV's radiator intake. The phosphorus ignited on contact with the engine bay's heat. Within 3 seconds, smoke was pouring from under the hood in thick white columns. Within 10 seconds, flame. The engine bay became an oven, then a furnace, then a bonfire. The SUV's driver slammed the brakes, the vehicle slewing sideways as fire climbed the windshield from below. "Two down," Sledge yelled, but the third vehicle wasn't an SUV. As the burning wreck fell away behind them and the smoke cleared, the thing that emerged from the darkness was something else entirely. A semi-truck cab. No trailer. Just a tractor unit, massive and black, running without lights. Its engine had been modified. The sound it made was not the diesel growl of a commercial vehicle. It was a scream, a high-pitched mechanical shriek of forced induction and nitrous oxide injection, the sound of a machine built for one purpose: ramming. The semi surged forward with impossible acceleration. Its sideswipe spur who was holding the right flank. Bike and rider went down in a shower of sparks, and a sound that Sledge would hear in his nightmares for years, the crunch of metal and bone, and the skidding screech of a human body being dragged across asphalt at 70 miles an hour. Man down, Grit screamed over the radio. The semi was gaining on the van. Its reinforced bumper was 3 feet from the rear doors. At this distance, Sledge could see the driver through the windshield. Just a shape, a silhouette without features. The ghost, the cartel's problem solver. The thing Ashcroft sent when he wanted everyone in a room to stop breathing. "We can't outrun it," the driver shouted from the cab. The speedometer was already at 95, and the van was shaking apart. Wren's voice cut through the chaos from the floor. The boneyard turnoff! How far? Sledge looked at her. She was still on the floor, still shielding Junie, but she had crawled to the laptop and opened a GPS application. She was calculating. 2 miles, the driver called back. It's a dirt road, Wren said. Sharp right, turn off the highway. The van can make it at 60 if the driver brakes hard going in. That semi is carrying 15,000 pounds and a modified engine. It can't decelerate fast enough to make a 90-degree turn at any speed above 40. Sledge stared at her. How do you know that? Because I spent 10 years in vehicles, Deck. I know what they can and can't do. I know their turning radius, their braking distance, their weight distribution. Tell the driver to aim for the turnoff and brake at the last possible second. Sledge grabbed the radio. Grit, the boneyard turnoff is 2 miles ahead. We bait the semi, take the turn hard. It can't follow. Copy that. All units clear the right lane. Give the van room. The bikes scattered like sparrows ahead of a hawk. The van surged forward, the driver pushing the engine past redline. Behind them, the semi closed the gap. 100 feet, 50, 20. The bumper was close enough to touch. The driver's cab filled the rear view mirror like a black wall. 1 mile to the turnoff. The road marker flashed past. Half a mile. The semi's horn blared a sound like the end of the world. The driver saw the dirt road. A gap in the guardrail marked by a rusted sign that read Callaway Metals, which was the boneyard's legal fiction. He stood on the brakes. The van's tires locked. Smoke poured from the wheel wells. The vehicle slewed right, shuddering, and the driver cranked the wheel hard. The van hit the dirt road at 58 miles an hour, fishtailing wildly gravel, spraying in a rooster tail, the rear end swinging out over the edge of the road before the tires caught, and the van straightened and plunged down the dirt track into the dark valley. Behind them, the semi tried to follow. The driver locked the brakes. 18 wheels screamed against asphalt. Rubber burned. Smoke filled the air. But 15,000 pounds at 92 miles an hour does not stop because a driver asked it to. The cab skidded past the turnoff, plowing through the guardrail in an explosion of metal and concrete, and the momentum carried it over the edge of the ravine. For 1 second, the semi was airborne. Then gravity remembered it existed. The truck hit the bottom of the ravine with a sound like a building falling down. The fuel tanks ruptured on impact. A fireball erupted from the canyon floor, orange and white and massive, turning the night sky into a brief false dawn. The shock wave rocked the van even at a quarter-mile distance. Sledge slammed the door shut. The wind died. The gunfire died. The screaming engines died. All that remained was the crunch of gravel under tires and the heavy breathing of people who had been very close to dying and were now for the moment not. Is it over? Junie whispered from the floor. Wren held her tighter. For tonight, baby. The boneyard emerged from the darkness like a graveyard for machines. It sat in a natural bowl between sandstone ridges, invisible from the highway, accessible only by the single dirt road that wound through a narrow canyon pass. Towers of crushed cars rose against the night sky like rusted monuments. A corrugated metal workshop squatted at the center, surrounded by shipping containers, engine hoists, and the skeletal remains of motorcycles in various stages of resurrection. It was 1 in the morning when the convoy rolled through the gates. Spur had survived the crash. The Prospect vehicle had picked him up a mile back. His left leg was broken in 2 places, and his skin had been removed from most of his right side by the asphalt, but he was conscious, cursing fluently, and demanding whiskey instead of morphine. Boulder carried him into the shop and set him on a workbench, like a wounded animal on a veterinarian's table. The mood was grim but focused. Bikers who had been laughing and drinking 8 hours ago were now checking ammunition, patching wounds, and watching the ridgeline with the quiet vigilance of men who knew the night wasn't finished with them yet. Wren sat at a workbench in the back of the shop. The laptop was open in front of her. Junie was asleep on a cot behind her, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like motor oil and was the warmest thing she had touched in years. Sledge stood on one side of the workbench. Grit stood on the other. Wren was not looking at them. She was looking at the screen, scrolling through files with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining scans before an operation. Here, she said, stopping on a folder she hadn't opened before. It was nested 3 levels deep, labeled with a string of numbers that meant nothing to a casual observer, but everything to someone who had spent 10 years learning the architecture of Garrett Finch's paranoid filing system. She opened it. Inside were emails, not the coded correspondence between Lyle and Haddon that she had already shown Sledge. These were different. These were between Haddon and someone using an encrypted address with no real name attached. But the content was unmistakable. They were discussing route schedules and payments. They were discussing the expansion of the trafficking network into new territories. And they were discussing a problem. The problem was a federal investigation out of the DEA's Phoenix field office that was getting too close to the transport corridors. The encrypted correspondent was advising Haddon on which agents to redirect and which cases to bury. The language was specific. It referenced case numbers, agent names, and budget allocations. "This person isn't just bribing Haddon," Wren said quietly. "This person is running Haddon, giving him instructions. This is someone inside the federal system who is managing the entire judicial cover from above." She looked up at Sledge. "If we send this to the FBI's Phoenix office, it goes to the same people these emails are discussing. It gets buried. It gets redirected. It disappears into the same system that made me disappear." Grit leaned forward, and his massive forearms resting on the workbench. "So who do we send it to?" "No one inside the system," Wren said. "We go outside, we go to the press, and we go to the DEA, but not the Phoenix office. We go straight to Washington. The agents being mentioned in these emails as targets, they're the honest ones. They're the ones being sabotaged. If we can get the data to them directly, they'll know exactly what to do with it." "That's a big if," Sledge said. "We're in a scrapyard in the middle of the Arizona desert. We don't exactly have a contacts at the DEA or the New York Times." "I do," Wren said. Both men stared at her. "Not personally, but in the files. Garrett kept a separate folder of contacts he called insurance people he planned to reach out to if he ever needed to burn the operation and save himself. Journalists, agents, prosecutors, people who had been trying to build cases against Ashcroft's network for years and kept hitting dead ends. Their names, their emails, their direct phone numbers. Garrett collected them the way a rat collects escape routes." She opened the folder. Inside were 12 names with full contact information. 3 were journalists at major national publications. 4 were DEA agents assigned to counter-trafficking operations. 5 were federal prosecutors in jurisdictions outside Arizona. Garrett never used them because using them would mean admitting what he was. "But I don't have that problem. I'm not a criminal running from the law. I'm a victim with 10 years of evidence and 400 names on a list. When I send this, it won't be a tip from a drug dealer. It will be a testimony from a survivor." She closed the laptop. "But sending the files alone isn't enough. Haddon will try to suppress it. Ashcroft will run. Lyle will destroy every paper trail he can reach. We need them caught, not just exposed. Caught. In a place where no judge can sign a release order and no lawyer can file a motion and no fixer can make a phone call." She looked at Grit, then at Sledge. Her eyes were burning with something that went beyond anger, beyond revenge. It was the cold, precise fire of a woman who had spent a decade memorizing every face and every voice and every detail of the machine that had consumed her life and who now held the blueprints to that machine in her hands. "We call Ashcroft. We tell him we have the drive. We tell him we'll trade it for safe passage. He'll come because he has to. The drive is the only thing that connects him to 400 victims and 15 years of operations. He can't delegate this. He can't send lawyers or mercenaries. He has to come himself because he has to see the drive destroyed with his own eyes." "You want to lure a cartel boss to a scrapyard," Grit said slowly. He removed the cigar from his mouth and studied it like it contained the answer to a question he hadn't finished asking. "Not a scrapyard," Wren corrected. "A killing ground. The terrain is perfect. The ridgelines provide elevation. The crushed car towers provide concealment. There's one road in and one road out, and the canyon walls funnel any vehicle approach into a corridor that can be covered by 6 rifles. This is a better ambush site than 90% of the positions I read about in the military history books Garrett kept in the van." Grit raised an eyebrow and looked at Sledge. "Your sister been reading tactics in captivity." "She's been doing a lot more than reading," Sledge said. "I had 10 years with nothing but time and rage and a man too stupid to know I was dangerous," Wren said without emotion. "I read every book he brought into that van. I memorized maps from his GPS. I studied his phone screen through the partition window. I learned his operation better than he knew it himself. If that makes me a tactician, fine. I didn't go to West Point, I went to hell. The curriculum was different, but the education was thorough. Grit stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something Sledge had never seen him do in 20 years of brotherhood. He nodded in deference, not to a soldier, not to a biker, to a woman in a hospital gown who weighed 105 pounds and had just drawn up a battle plan on a grease-stained workbench. I want to lure a cartel boss to your scrapyard, your ground, your rules, your men on the high ground with rifles. And while he's here, standing in the middle of a kill box, he doesn't know he's walked into the emails are being delivered to every journalist and agent and prosecutor on that list. Timed, automatic. I'll set up delayed delivery from 3 different email accounts. If I don't cancel the send within 2 hours, everything goes. Everywhere. Simultaneously. And if something goes wrong, Sledge asked, if Ashcroft comes with an army, he'll come with guards, maybe 12, maybe 15. He's arrogant Deck. He wears white suits to dirt meetings and calls bikers mechanics. He doesn't respect you. He doesn't fear you. And that's his weakness, because he'll walk into this yard thinking he's the most dangerous thing in it. She paused, looked at Sledge with an expression that was half command and half request. I need you to trust me on this. I've been inside this machine for 10 years. I know how it thinks. I know how it moves. I know its blind spots and its pressure points, and the exact amount of ego that makes a man like Ashcroft drive to a place he's never been to, meet people he considers beneath him. Grit looked at Sledge. The 2 men exchanged a glance that contained an entire conversation, the kind of wordless communication that comes from decades of trusting each other's judgment in situations where bad judgment means death. Sledge turned back to Wren. Your plan, your call. Wren nodded once. She opened the laptop again and began to type. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed and precision of a woman who had been composing this message in her head for years, waiting for the moment she would have a keyboard beneath her hands and a connection to the world. She drafted 3 emails, each contained the same data package but was addressed to a different tier of recipients. The first went to the DEA agents, the second went to the journalists, the third went to the federal prosecutors. Each was set on a 2-hour delayed delivery scheduled to send at 11 a.m. the following morning. Then she composed a 4th message. This one was not an email. It was a text sent from a burner phone to a number she had memorized from Garrett's contact list. Dominic Ashcroft's personal line. The message read, "This is the woman from the van. I have the drive. Garrett's password has been changed. I am the only one who knows the new one. Meet me at Callaway Metals mile marker 47, Route 93 South at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone or come with an army, it won't matter. You have 2 hours after that to negotiate, or the contents go to the DEA, the New York Times, and every federal prosecutor between here and Washington. Your move." She hit send. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the generator and the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the ridge above them. Wren set the phone down on the workbench. She looked at the 2 men standing across from her, the brother she had dreamed about every night for 10 years, and the club president who commanded 50 men willing to dine on his word. "It's done," she said. "Now we get ready." Outside, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to creep over the eastern ridge. The stars were fading. The air was cold and still and smelled like rust and gasoline. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzed in the pocket of a man in a white suit, and when he read the message on the screen, his face did something it had not done in a very long time. It showed fear. The morning came slowly to the boneyard, the way mornings come to places that have earned the right to be left alone. The sun crept over the eastern ridge in thin bands of copper and gold, painting the towers of crushed automobiles in colors they hadn't worn since they rolled off assembly lines decades ago. Rust became bronze. Broken glass became diamond. The corrugated metal walls of the workshop caught the light and threw it back at the sky like a challenge. Wren Callaway had not slept. She stood at the workbench where she had spent the night preparing, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of coffee that one of the prospects had brewed on a camp stove using water from a 5-gallon jug and grounds that tasted like they had been scraped from the floor of a gas station. It was the best coffee she had ever had in her life. Not because of the flavor, because she had chosen to drink it. She had walked to the stove, picked up the pot, and poured it herself. No one had handed it to her through a slot in a door. No one had told her when she was allowed to drink. The act of pouring her own coffee was so small and so enormous that she had stood there for a full minute, holding the mug, feeling the heat seep into her palms before she trusted herself to take a sip without crying. She didn't cry. She drank. And then she went back to work. The laptop was still open. The 3 emails were queued, scheduled to send at 11 a.m. She had checked them 4 times. She had verified every recipient address against Garrett's contact file. She had written a cover letter for each package that was clear, concise, and devastating. It identified her by name. It provided her missing persons case number from Fresno. It described her captivity in clinical factual terms that were more horrifying for their lack of emotion than any plea could have been. And it directed the recipients to the attached files with a single instruction. These records document a human trafficking operation spanning 15 years and 400 victims. The judicial protection for this operation originates from Judge Marcus Haddon, District of Arizona. I am one of the names on the list. My daughter was born in captivity. Act accordingly. At 8 a.m., the boneyard began to transform. Wren watched from the workshop doorway as 50 men moved with the coordinated purpose of an army preparing a position. They had arrived through the night in small groups, riding without lights through the back canyons, their engines muffled by baffles that the club kept for exactly this kind of occasion. The Purdue Charter, the Arizona Nomads, members from Bullhead City and Tucson, and a handful of hard-looking men from the Nevada Charter who had driven through the night because grit had called in a debt that was 20 years old and still good. They took the high ground. The riflemen positioned themselves on top of the crushed car towers lying prone on flattened roofs with scoped hunting rifles and clear sight lines to every inch of the yard below. Shotgunners crouched behind shipping containers at ground level, covering the approach road and the gate. A team of 4 men strung a thin steel cable across the entrance road at bumper height, anchored to 2 concrete-filled drums hidden in the scrub, a trap that would shred the tires of any vehicle that tried to flee at speed. Grit oversaw the deployment from the cab of a decommissioned crane that sat in the center of the yard like a rusted watchtower. From up there, he could see everything: the road, the gate, the ridge lines, the kill zones. But it was Wren who had drawn the map. She had sketched it at 3 in the morning on the back of a parts invoice using a grease pencil and a ruler made from a straightened coat hanger. She had marked the positions, the sight lines, the dead zones, and the funnel points. She had calculated the distance from the gate to the center of the yard where Sledge would stand, and she had determined that it was exactly 97 feet, which meant that anyone standing at that center point was within effective range of every rifle on the ridgeline and every shotgun behind the containers. Sledge had looked at the map and then looked at his sister and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The map was perfect. The woman who had drawn it had spent 10 years with nothing to do but think, and she had used every second of that time to become something that no one, least of all the men who had caged her, had anticipated. At 9:30 a.m., Wren took Uni down to the storm cellar beneath the workshop. It was a concrete bunker 10 feet underground, built in the 1960s by the original property owner, who had been convinced that the Soviets were going to bomb Kingman. It had a steel door, ventilation, and 6 inches of reinforced concrete on every side. Ratchet was already inside, armed with a shotgun and enough water and food for 3 days. Wren knelt in front of her daughter. Junie was wearing the same clothes from the hospital, a child-sized set of scrubs that the nurses had found for her, and she was holding Mr. Bunn, who now had a fresh seam across his belly, where Wren had stitched him closed again using a needle and thread from the workshop's first aid kit. The rabbit looked like a veteran, battle-scarred but intact. "I need you to stay down here with Mr. Ratchet for a little while," Wren said. "Why can't I come with you?" "Because Mommy has to finish something, and I need to know you're safe so I can concentrate." Uni looked at her with eyes that were too old for 6, eyes that had seen the inside of a van and the flash of gunfire on a highway and the red emergency lights of a hospital hallway. Eyes that understood more than any child should understand about the distance between the world as it was supposed to be and the world as it actually was. "Are the bad men coming?" "Yes, baby, but so are the good ones. And Mommy has a plan." Junie considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing a constitutional question. Then she held up Mr. Bunn. "Mr. Bunn says to be careful." Wren kissed her daughter's forearm. She breathed in the smell of hospital soap and desert dust, and something underneath both of those things that was purely uni, that irreducible essence of a child who had been born in darkness and had somehow, against all odds and all logic, grown toward the light anyway. Tell Mr. Bunn I will. She climbed out of the cellar. Ratchet sealed the door behind her. The sound of the steel bolt sliding home was the sound of a mother putting the most important thing in her world behind the strongest wall she could find so that she could walk into the open and face the thing that had taken everything from her. At 9:55 a.m., Sledge stood in the center of the yard. He was alone, or appeared to be. The bikers were invisible, hidden in their positions, silent as the rusted metal that concealed them. The yard looked empty, abandoned. Just a big man in a leather vest standing in the dust, holding a flash drive in his right hand, squinting against the morning sun. In his left ear, a small radio earpiece connected him to Grit on the crane and to Wren, who had positioned herself inside the workshop, watching through a gap in the corrugated wall. She could see the gate. She could see Sledge. She could see the road. Anything? Sledge murmured. Dust cloud on the road. Wren's voice came through the earpiece. 4 vehicles, Escalades, black, moving slow. They'll be at the gate in 2 minutes. How many men? Assume 3 per vehicle plus Ashcroft. That's 13, maybe 16. They'll leave drivers in the cars, so 10 to 12 on foot. The ones who get out first will be security. They'll sweep the perimeter with their eyes. They won't find anything because your men are above their natural sight line. People don't look up. It's a biological blind spot. Sledge almost smiled. Almost. Anything else, General? Don't improvise. Let him talk. Let him feel like he's in control. The longer he stands in the yard, the closer we get to 11 o'clock. The convoy appeared at the gate. 4 black Cadillac Escalades rolled through the rusted entrance in a single vehicle, their polished surfaces obscenely clean against the backdrop of decay and salvage. They stopped in a line, engines idling, tinted windows reflecting the desert sun. Dust settled around them like a veil. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The engines hummed. The wind pushed a tumbleweed across the yard. A hawk circled overhead, riding a thermal indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Then the doors opened. They came out in pairs. 2 from the lead vehicle, 2 from the third, 2 from the fourth. Armed men in tactical clothing, carrying assault rifles held at low ready, scanning the yard with the professional eyes of private military contractors. They were not cartel foot soldiers. They were mercenaries. Hired guns with military training and no particular loyalty to anything except the next paycheck. They fanned out in a semicircle, covering the yard with overlapping fields of fire. One of them spoke into a radio. A confirmation. All clear. The rear door of the second Escalade opened. Dominic Ashcroft stepped out into the Arizona morning like a man stepping onto a stage. He was smaller than Sledge had expected. 5'8", maybe 5'9", with the compact build of a man who exercised religiously and ate carefully and took great pains to maintain the appearance of a person who had never done a day of manual labor in his life. His suit was white linen, impeccably tailored, without a single crease or speck of dust, despite the dirt road he had just traveled. His shoes were white leather. His hair was silver and sculpted. His face was tanned and smooth and entirely without expression, the face of a man who had long ago removed the muscles responsible for involuntary emotion because they interfered with business. He walked to the center of the yard, stopping 20 feet from Sledge. His guards took up positions behind him, rifles trained on the lone biker. Ashcroft looked around the yard with the casual disdain of a health inspector touring a condemned building. Mr. Calloway? His voice was measured, controlled, each word placed with the precision of a chess piece. You have caused me considerable expense. You kidnapped my sister, Sledge replied. His voice was flat, conversational, the voice of a man making small talk about the weather while standing on a landmine. You stole 10 years of her life. You kept her chained in a van like an animal. You sold her for $20,000. Business. Ashcroft adjusted his cufflinks. They caught the sunlight. Gold. Monogrammed. Unfortunate, perhaps, but business. The woman was collateral in a larger transaction. Her continued existence was until recently an acceptable cost of managing a difficult asset. Mr. Finch was unreliable. She provided motivation for his cooperation. She's not a woman to me. She's my blood. Sentimentality. Ashcroft said the word the way a surgeon says tumor, something to be identified and removed. Do you have the drive? Sledge held it up. The small black rectangle caught the light. Give it to me, and I will offer you something I rarely offer, my word. The woman and the child go free. Your club is left alone. No retaliation, no consequences. A clean ending to an unpleasant chapter. Your word, Sledge repeated. The word of a man who sells children. The word of a man who has never broken a contract. Ashcroft's eyes were steady, empty the eyes of something that had evolved past the need for empathy. I am a businessman, Mr. Calloway, not a monster. Monsters act on impulse, act on calculation. And my calculation tells me that this drive in your hands is a liability to my organization. In my hands, it ceases to exist. That is the optimal outcome for both of us. And if I say no, Ashcroft sighed, the sigh of a teacher dealing with a slow student. You are one man in a vest standing in a junkyard. I have 12 men with assault rifles. I have resources that extend into every courtroom and every police station in this state. I have Judge Haddon who can issue a warrant for your arrest and the arrest of every member of your club within the hour. Saying no is not an option you possess. Sledge smiled. It was a specific kind of smile. Not warm, not amused. It was the smile of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when the other side reveals the full depth of its arrogance, because arrogance is a load-bearing wall, and when you remove it, everything above it falls. You ain't not alone, Dominic. He raised his fist. From the top of the crushed car towers, from the ridge lines of the valley, from behind the shipping containers and the engine hoists in the decommissioned crane, from every shadow and every elevation and every angle of advantage that the boneyard possessed. Silhouettes rose, 50 men, armed, positioned, patient. They had been there for hours motionless, invisible, waiting with the discipline of hunters who understood that the difference between a trap and a massacre was timing. Rifle bolts racked in unison. The sound was enormous. 50 separate mechanical actions combining into a single metallic statement that echoed off the valley walls and came back doubled and tripled until the yard rang with it like the inside of a bell. Ashcroft looked up. For the first time in Sledge's view of the man, something moved behind those empty eyes. It was small and it was brief, but it was unmistakable. It was the recognition that the world was not arranged the way he had assumed it was arranged. It was the realization that the junkyard was not a meeting point. It was a kill box, and he was standing in the center of it. His guards looked at the ridge lines. They looked at each other. They looked at their employer. The math was simple. 12 men on flat ground with rifles versus 50 men on high ground with rifles. The outcome was not ambiguous. You came to a biker war in a suit, Sledge said calmly. Bad move. Ashcroft's jaw tightened. A single muscle flexed in his cheek, the only crack in the porcelain. He stood very still for a long moment and recalculating, reprocessing, running the numbers through a mind that was not accustomed to arriving at answers it didn't like. Then he spoke. And what he said turned the temperature in the yard down by 30 degrees. Bring him out. One of the guards at the rear escalade opened the trunk. He reached in and pulled out a man. The man's hands were zip-tied behind his back. His face was bloody. His uniform was torn. His badge was still pinned to his chest, hanging at an angle from a shirt that had been ripped during a struggle. Deputy Harlan Cade. They dragged him forward and forced him to his knees in the dirt 10 feet from Ashcroft. A guard pressed the barrel of a rifle against the back of Cade's skull. Cade's eyes were swollen nearly shut. His nose was broken, but he was conscious, and when he saw Sledge, he shook his head slowly. A message. Don't sacrifice everything for me. We intercepted your young friend on the highway this morning, Ashcroft said. His composure had returned, rearranged around this new card, the way a poker player rearranges his expression around a hidden ace. He was heading this direction, alone, brave but foolish, much like everyone in this yard. He looked at Sledge. Here is my revised offer. Give me the real drive, not the decoy you are undoubtedly holding, the real one with the real password, or I will have this man's brains distributed across your lovely dirt floor. And then I will call Judge Haddon, who will issue warrants for every man on those ridgelines. And by tomorrow morning, every Hell's Angel in Arizona will be in a federal holding cell, and your sister and her daughter will be in my custody again. Silence. The wind blew dust across the yard. The hawks circled. Sledge looked at Cade. Cade looked back at him through swollen eyes. The young deputy's lips moved. 2 words. No sound. But Sledge could read them. Do it. Meaning don't trade. Meaning let me die. Meaning this is bigger than one man. But Sledge couldn't do it. Cade had saved them at the hospital. Cade had pointed a gun at his own sheriff and told him to run. Cade was 26 years old and had chosen the right side when the right side looked like the losing side, and that was a debt that could not be repaid by watching him die in the dirt. The yard was frozen. The bikers on the ridgeline held their positions. Their rifles were trained on the guards, but the guard behind Cade had his barrel pressed against the deputy's skull. One twitch and Cade was gone. It was a stalemate. Ashcroft knew it. Sledge knew it. The mercenaries knew it. And then the workshop door opened. Wren Calloway walked out into the sunlight. Nobody had told her to. Nobody had called for her. Nobody had given permission because Wren Calloway had spent 10 years in a world where permission was a leash, and she had decided somewhere in the long darkness that she would never wear one again. She walked across the yard with slow, deliberate steps. She was still wearing the hospital scrubs. She weighed 105 pounds. Her hair was matted. Her arms were scarred. The morning sun illuminated every mark that 10 years of captivity had left on her body, every bruise and every bone and every evidence of what had been done to her. She walked past Sledge, who reached for her arm and missed because she was already past him. She walked past the line of mercenaries who tracked her with their rifles but didn't fire because nobody had given the order, and because there was something about the way she moved that made pulling a trigger feel like the wrong response. She walked straight to Dominic Ashcroft and stopped 3 feet from him. She was a foot shorter than the man who had bought her. She weighed half what he weighed. She had no weapon, no armor, no leverage, except the one thing she had carried for 10 years, inside a mind that had refused to break. "You don't remember me," Wren said. Ashcroft looked at her, his eyes narrowed. He was trying to place her, trying to match the skeleton in hospital scrubs with the inventory spreadsheet in his memory. "I am line 412 on your list. Purchase price $20,000. Buyer code LY7. Transaction date October 14th, 2008. I was 25 years old. I was sold by a man named Prescott Lyle out of a house in Fresno, California. I was transported to Albuquerque in a van that smelled like chemicals and fear, and I have been inside that van chained to the floor for 3,652 days." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence in the yard was so complete that a whisper would have echoed off the canyon walls. "I am the only person in the world who knows the password to that drive. Not my brother, not your lawyers, not the ghost you sent who is currently burning at the bottom of a ravine on Route 93. Me. The furniture, the thing chained to the floor, the collateral." She took one step closer to Ashcroft, close enough to see the pores on his nose, close enough to smell his cologne, which was expensive and faintly citrus, and made her stomach convulse with a nausea that had nothing to do with its scent and everything to do with the world it represented. "Let the officer go, and I will give you the password. Right here, out loud. You can verify it on your phone, and then you can leave." Ashcroft studied her. Behind the mask of composure, calculations were running. The woman knew the password. The woman was here, unprotected, within arm's reach. If he took her now, if he grabbed her and retreated to the vehicles, the bikers couldn't fire without risking her life. But Wren saw the calculation forming behind his eyes because she had spent a decade reading the faces of men who saw her as a thing to be used rather than a person to be heard. "Before you consider taking me," she said, her voice dropping to a register that only Ashcroft could hear, "know that I have already sent the contents of that drive to 12 people. Journalists, DEA agents, federal prosecutors. The emails are scheduled to send in." She glanced at the watch on Sledge's wrist visible over her shoulder. 43 minutes. "If I walk back into that workshop and type a cancellation code, they don't send. If I don't, every news outlet and every law enforcement agency in the country receives the complete financial records of your operation, including Judge Haddon's correspondence." She let that settle. "So you can kill the officer. You can grab me. You can shoot every biker on those ridges, and in 43 minutes it won't matter, because the drive is the copy. The original data is already in the cloud, and the cloud doesn't negotiate. Ashcroft's face did something extraordinary. It aged. 10 years fell onto it in 5 seconds. The smooth, controlled mass cracked along fault lines that had been hidden by decades of authority and wealth and the absolute certainty that the world was his to arrange. The cracks spread from his eyes to his mouth to his jaw, and what emerged from beneath the mask was something small and human and afraid. You're bluffing. I spent 10 years in a box, Mr. Ashcroft. I don't bluff, I plan. Ashcroft looked at his guards. He looked at the ridge line. He looked at the kneeling deputy with the rifle at his skull. He ran the numbers one final time and arrived at an answer he had never arrived at before in his professional life. He had lost. "Release the officer," Ashcroft said. His voice was thin. The guard behind Cade hesitated, looked at his employer, saw the defeat, removed the barrel from Cade's skull and stepped back. Cade fell forward onto his hands, gasping. Sledge moved fast, crossing the distance in 3 strides, pulling the deputy to his feet and half carrying him toward the workshop. Wren stood her ground. She had not moved. She was still 3 feet from Ashcroft, looking up at him with the calm, unblinking gaze of a woman who had learned patience in the hardest school on earth. "The password," Ashcroft said. Wren looked at her watch. 39 minutes. The siren started as a whisper. A thin wail on the edge of hearing, carried on the morning wind from the direction of the highway. It grew. It multiplied. It became a chorus. Ashcroft heard it. His guards heard it. The mercenaries looked at each other. "What is this?" Ashcroft breathed. "That is the DEAOSI," Wren said. "Not the Phoenix office. Washington. I sent the first batch of files 6 hours ago from a separate email account. No timer, no delay. Straight to the agents your own records identified as targets of judicial interference. They've been driving through the night." The color left Ashcroft's face entirely. He looked like a man watching his house burn from across the street, close enough to feel the heat, but too far to do anything except stand there and understand that everything inside was gone. "You said the emails were on a timer. You said 43 minutes. "I lied," Wren said. "I learned that from the men who owned me." Ashcroft turned. He walked toward his Escalade. His walk was no longer the measured stride of a man who controlled rooms. It was the stiff, mechanical movement of a puppet whose strings were being cut one by one. He didn't make it to the car. The DEA vehicles came through the gate in a rush of black and blue unmarked SUVs and marked sedans, sirens screaming, light bars strobing. Agents in tactical gear poured out with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Federal badges glinted in the morning sun. Ashcroft's mercenaries dropped their weapons. They were professionals. They could calculate the value of dying for a man who could no longer pay them, and the answer was 0. Ashcroft himself stood very still as 2 agents approached him. He did not resist when they turned him around. He did not speak when they read him his rights. The handcuffs closed around his wrists with a small, precise click that echoed in the sudden quiet of the yard. Sledge walked up behind Ashcroft as the agents led him away. He wound up with everything he had, every ounce of 10 years of grief and fury and sleepless nights, and he drove his fist into Ashcroft's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. Ashcroft crumpled. The agents looked at Sledge. Sledge looked at the agents. "He tripped," Sledge said. The agents looked at each other. One of them fought and lost a battle with a smile. "Must have been the uneven ground," the agent said. "We'll note it in the report." November 22nd, 2018, 38 days later, Thanksgiving. The Hells Angels clubhouse in San Bernardino had been transformed. Not physically. The pool table was still there. The bar was still there. The smell of leather and motor oil and stale beer was permanent and ineradicable, baked into the walls like the smell of incense in a cathedral. But something in the atmosphere had shifted the way the air shifts after a long storm breaks, and the first patch of blue appears in the sky. In the corner where high-stakes pool games usually took place, a tea party was in progress. Boulder, 300 pounds of muscle and menace, with a guillotine tattooed on his neck, was perched on a milk crate that creaked ominously under his weight. He was holding a plastic teacup the size of a contact lens between his thumb and forefinger. His pinky was extended. His expression was one of deadly seriousness. Across from him sat Junie. She was wearing clean clothes, jeans that fit, a sweater without stains, sneakers with lights in the heels that flashed pink and blue with every step. Her hair was brushed and braided. She looked like a different child. She looked like a child. "More tea, Mr. Boulder," Junie asked, tipping an imaginary pot. "Don't mind if I do, Princess," Boulder rumbled, extending his cup. At the bar, Sledge leaned against the counter and watched. A cigarette burned between his fingers, forgotten. Beside him, Wren stood with a mug of coffee in her hands. She looked different. The hollows in her cheeks had filled. The bruises had faded through their spectrum of yellow and green and vanished entirely. She had gained 15 pounds. Her hair was clean and cut to her shoulders, and she stood straight, no longer hunched, in the protective posture of someone expecting a blow. "He's good with her," Wren said, nodding at Boulder. "3 daughters of his own." Sledge grunted. "Wouldn't know it to look at him." A moment passed. The warmth of the room settled around them. "We can't stay here forever, Deck. The club rules about civilians." "The club voted," Sledge said. "You're under protection indefinitely. Besides, Grit says you're the first person who's cooked a meal in this clubhouse that didn't taste like a crime scene." Wren managed a small smile. Then it faded. "I saw the news. The arrests, Ashcroft, Haddon, Lyle, 37 indictments. But Garrett, nobody said where he is. The news just says he's in federal custody." Sledge was quiet for a moment. He set down his cigarette. "Cade drove out yesterday. Harlan Cade. He drove out from Kingman, made a detour from a prisoner transfer in San Diego." The heavy steel door of the clubhouse buzzed. The video monitor flickered. A prospect checked the screen. "Arizona plates, boss. Sheriff's Department. 1 vehicle." The room tensed. Hands moved toward waistbands. "Open it," Sledge said. "He's expected." Harlan Cade walked into the clubhouse. He looked different from the last time they'd seen him. The bruises from Ashcroft's men had healed, though a scar above his left eyebrow would be permanent. He wore a sheriff's uniform now, not a deputy's. The star on his chest was gold, not silver. Mojave County had needed a new sheriff after DeCault's arrest, and the county commission had made the easiest decision of their careers. He spotted Wren and walked to the bar. He removed his hat. "Ma'am?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a small sealed plastic bag. "I have some news about Garrett Finch." Wren gripped Sledge's arm. Her knuckles went white. "Finch was in administrative segregation at the Federal Detention Center in Florence," Cade said. "Scheduled to testify next week against the cartel leadership in exchange for a plea deal." "He was going to walk," Wren whispered. "No, ma'am." Cade's voice was firm. "Yesterday morning, a guard with some significant gambling debts accidentally left a cell block door open for about 3 minutes. Block C general population." The room was very still. By the time they restored order, Finch was in the laundry room. Official cause of death is listed as suicide, though the coroner noted that it's difficult to stab yourself 40 times in the back. Wren stared at Cade. The information moved through her in waves. First disbelief, then comprehension. Then a feeling she didn't have a name for something that was not joy and not relief and not satisfaction, but contained elements of all three alloyed with something darker that she would spend years learning to put down. "He's dead," she said. Not a question, a confirmation. The final entry in a ledger she had been keeping in her head for a decade. "He is dead, and he can never hurt you again." Cade slid the plastic bag across the bar. Inside was a silver locket, small, tarnished. The chain was broken. Wren picked it up. Her hands trembled for the first time since the boneyard. "My mother's locket," her voice cracked. "He took it from me the night we left Fresno. He wore it on his keychain, like a trophy." She pressed the tarnished silver heart against her chest and closed her eyes. The tears came silently, the way they had always come, because she had spent 10 years learning that sound was dangerous, and some lessons take longer to unlearn than others. Sledge wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He looked at Cade over her head and gave a single slow nod. "Thank you, Harlan." "Just doing the job, Sledge." Cade put his hat back on. He glanced at Junie, who was still pouring invisible tea for a 300-pound man in a denim vest. "You take care, Juniper. You've got a lot of folks looking out for you." Junie waved. Bye, Mr. Policeman. 2 days later, the buzzing of the tattoo needle filled the workshop with a sound like a wasp trapped in a jar. Wren sat in the reclining chair, her jaw set, her eyes focused on a point on the far wall. The artist, a lanky man everyone called Sketch, worked on her left shoulder with the focused intensity of a man who understood that this piece was not decoration. It was surgery. It was the removal of something malignant and its replacement with something alive. Junie sat on a stool beside Sledge, watching with fascinated eyes. Does it hurt, Mommy? A little baby. But it's a good kind of hurt, like pulling out a splinter. It stings coming out, but then it's gone. Sketch wiped the excess ink with a green soap towel. He leaned back. Done. Have a look. Wren stood and walked to the mirror. She pulled down the strap of her tank top. The blue flower was gone. For 10 years it had sat on her shoulder like a brand, a mark of ownership that Garrett had forced her to get to match his own. A claim staked in ink on a body that was not his to claim. It was gone. In its place, built from the dark blue ink of the original flower, repurposed and transformed, was a phoenix. It rose from a bed of fire, its wings spread wide, the feathers detailed in shades of blue and gold and crimson. It was fierce. It was beautiful. And in its talons, the bird carried a stopwatch. A stopwatch that read WC. It matches yours, Deck, Wren said softly, touching the image in the mirror. She looked at Sledge's forearm, where his own stopwatch tattoo sat frozen in time. But mine isn't stuck anymore. The bird is carrying it forward. Sledge looked at the phoenix and felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been locked in place for 10 years, frozen like the hands on his tattoo, suddenly moved. Not much, just a tick, but enough. Me too, Junie announced, hopping off the stool. I want one. Sledge laughed. A real laugh, deep and rolling, the kind that started in the belly and worked its way up through layers of scar tissue and grief and arrived at the surface as something warm and unexpected, like the first warm day after a long winter. Not until you're 18, Squirt. He reached into the pocket of his vest. But I got something else for you. He pulled out a small denim vest. It was child-sized, custom-stitched by the club's tailor, a woman in Fontana who had 3 grandchildren, and thought the whole thing was the most precious order she had ever filled. On the back, where a patch member would wear the death head, was a different image. A cartoon rabbit with one ear holding a tiny shield. Underneath, in red-stitched letters, Juniper. Club mascot. Junie slipped her arms into the vest. She turned to the mirror and stood next to her mother. Wren in her tank top with the phoenix on her shoulder. Junie in her denim vest with the rabbit on her back. Behind them, Sledge mountain-sized arms crossed, trying very hard to keep his face in its natural state of granite and failing completely. I look like you, Uncle Deck, Junie said. Yeah, kiddo. His voice was rough. You look like family. The Thanksgiving feast filled the parking lot and spilled into the workshop. Smokers the size of small boats puffed hickory and mesquite into the November air. Tables made from plywood on sawhorses were loaded with food that Wren had spent 2 days preparing because cooking was the first thing she had reclaimed, the first territory she had taken back from the years in the dark. Grit stood at the head of the table. He tapped his beer bottles with a knife. The music died. We got a lot to be thankful for this year. We lost some skin, we lost some chrome, but we didn't lose any brothers. And we gained 2 souls who are tougher than most of the sorry specimens at this table. He raised his bottle toward Wren and Junie. To Wren Calloway, who went through the worst thing any person can go through and came out the other side with a plan that took down a cartel, a federal judge, and 37 of the most dangerous people in the Southwest. You are without question the scariest person I have ever met, and I have been in this club for 40 years. Laughter, cheers, bottles clinking. And to Juniper, who walked up to the meanest-looking man in a diner and said 7 words that changed everything. Kid, you saved your mom. You saved your uncle. And you gave a bunch of ugly old bikers something they haven't had in a long time. A reason to be proud. Junie beamed. She raised her cup of apple juice. As the feast began, a small hand found its way into Sledge's massive palm. He looked down. Junie was holding his hand, her other hand busy with a turkey leg that was nearly as big as her forearm. Uncle Deck. Yeah, kiddo. Are we safe now? Sledge looked around the table. He saw Ratchet teaching Ren a card trick. He saw Boulder sneaking scraps to a puppy that had appeared at the gate 2 weeks ago and now had a collar and a name and a bed in the workshop. He saw 50 men who would ride through fire for the woman and child sitting beside him. He looked at the gate manned by armed prospects. He looked at the sky, clear and blue and wide open. Yeah, Uni, we're safe. We're home. 10 years later, May 2028, the gymnasium of Kingman High School was packed with parents fanning themselves with programs. The irony was not lost on anyone in the front row that the graduation was being held in the same town where it all began, in the shadow of the same stretch of Route 66 where a little girl had walked across a checkered floor and changed the course of a dozen lives. The principal leaned into the microphone. And now our valedictorian, Juniper Calloway, 16 years old, walked across the stage. She was striking, tall for her age, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and eyes that held the particular clarity of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer at an age when most children were learning to tie their shoes. She wore a golden graduation gown. She walked with the posture of a woman who knew where she had come from and was not ashamed of it. In the front row, the family occupied an entire bleacher section. Sledge was 55 now. His beard had gone white. His face was carved deeper by time and weather in a motorcycle accident in 2024 that had left him with a titanium rod in his right leg and a cane he used more often than he admitted. But he was there. He was upright. He was wearing his cut. Beside him sat Ren, 45, owner of a bakery in San Bernardino that had a 6-month waiting list for wedding cakes and a quiet reputation as the place where women who had survived bad things could find a boy and no questions asked. She was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with beauty products and everything to do with the absence of fear. Grit sat on the other side, retired from the presidency, but still wearing his patches because a man didn't stop being what he was just because he stopped holding the gavel. Juniper took the podium. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the crowd and found her mother's face. They say it takes a village to raise a child, she said, her voice clear and steady and carrying to every corner of the gymnasium. In my case, it took a motorcycle club. Nervous laughter from the crowd, not from the front row. From the front row came the sound of leather creaking as 50 men leaned forward. I stand here today because of 2 people. My mother, who spent 10 years in the worst circumstances a person can endure and never stopped fighting, who turned a stuffed rabbit into a weapon and a 6-year-old girl into a signal flare, who drew battle plans on the back of parts invoices and faced down the man who stole her life and made him blink. She paused. Let the words settle. And my Uncle Declan, who taught me that the size of your heart matters more than the size of your fists, though it doesn't hurt to have both. She rolled up the sleeve of her graduation gown. On her forearm, fresh and vivid against her skin, was a tattoo, a stopwatch. But unlike her uncle's, whose hands had been frozen for a decade before his sister's Phoenix carried them forward, Juniper's stopwatch had hands that were moving, ticking, alive. And underneath the dial, in clean black script, 4 words: time is a gift. I got this yesterday, she said into the microphone. My mom cried. My uncle pretended he didn't. I got it because, for the first 6 years of my life, time was a cage. And then a man in a diner looked at a little girl and saw family instead of a stranger. And time became something else. Time became a chance. She looked at the section of bikers. We don't judge people by the patches on their backs. We judge them by the courage in their hearts. Thank you. The bleachers erupted. The bikers did not clap politely. They roared. They whistled through their fingers. They stomped the aluminum bleachers with their boots until the gymnasium shook and the principal gripped the podium, and the parents in the middle rows looked around in alarm, and then in wonder, and then in something that might have been understanding. It was the sound of engines. It was the sound of thunder. It was the sound of 50 men who had ridden through gunfire and desert nights and 10 years of searching, telling a 16-year-old girl that she was seen and she was claimed and she was theirs. Sledge felt a tear roll down his cheek and disappear into his white beard. He did not wipe it away. Some things deserved to fall where they fell. Ren reached across the gap between their seats and took his hand. She squeezed once. He squeezed back. In the gymnasium of a high school in a small town on Route 66, a young woman in a golden gown threw her cap into the air. It rose spinning, catching the light. And for one perfect moment, everyone in the room, bikers and teachers and parents and children, watched it hang at the top of its arc, weightless, suspended between the past and the future, between the darkness of a locked van and the brightness of an open sky. Then gravity took it, the way gravity takes everything, and it fell back to Earth. But the girl who had thrown it was already moving forward, already walking toward the edge of the stage, and already reaching for whatever came next, with hands that had learned to hold on to hope the way other children learned to hold on to toys. Juniper Calloway went on to study criminal law. She became a federal prosecutor who specialized in dismantling human trafficking networks. In her first 5 years, she secured 47 convictions and freed over 200 victims from captivity. She kept a one-eared stuffed rabbit on her desk. Colleagues who asked about it received a smile and no explanation. Ronan Sledge Calloway passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after the graduation. His heart, the one he swore had turned to stone, simply decided it had done enough. The funeral procession stretched for 4 miles along Route 66. 63 motorcycles. No sirens. Just the sound of engines, steady and low, carrying him home one last time. Wren spoke at the service. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the dark years ago, and she had none left. She stood at the podium and told the story of a tattoo on a forearm and a little girl in a diner in the 7 words that brought her brother back from the dead. She said he was the bravest man she ever knew. She said he smelled like gasoline and bad coffee and safety. She said the stopwatch on his arm had finally stopped for real this time, and that was okay because the one on her shoulder was still moving, carried forward by a phoenix that would never land. And on a desk in a federal courthouse in Phoenix, a one-eared rabbit sat in a patch of afternoon sunlight, its button eyes scratched, nearly blind, its belly stitched and restitched, its stuffing rearranged by the hands of a woman who had turned a child's toy into a weapon, and a weapon into a memory, and a memory into a life that meant something. The rabbit said nothing. Rabbits never do. But if it could have spoken, it might have said what Juniper said every morning when she walked into her office and saw it sitting there waiting for her, the way it had always waited, patient and brave and missing an ear. We made it.